Well, that's the reason.
I get the meeting ID and once you get that open.
Okay. How do you get that?
Go into Zoom.
Oh, the Zoom, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's one.
So,
And I click on the little green shield all the way in the top left.
oh, that gives you, oh, okay.
810-2271.
So. He's a more needed.
2723.
Very. Mayor.
Okay, well, terrific. Well, good evening, everyone. This is quite a welcoming that we as a city council feel like we're really back in person when we have people in our audience. So thank you everyone for being here. This is the 7 p.m. regular meeting of the Orinda City Council for Tuesday, June 6th. And I will turn to our city clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Iverson. Here. Councilmember Malkani. Here. Vice Mayor G. Here. Mayor Miller.
Here.
And note for the record that Councilmember Riley has an excused absence this evening.
Great. And I would ask you to please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So our next item is adoption of the agenda. And we did have some minor clarifications on the agenda this evening for the capital improvement budget. I believe we have a replacement page 247. And then on item F4, there's just a clarification that we are, the item is to award a construction contract and not to approve the design plans. Do we have any other changes to the agenda or clarifications this evening, Mr. City Manager?
Just a note, Madam Mayor, one of the other correspondence is an updated, new tool. We've introduced the budget balancing worksheet. So because there was a sample in the package, but this has been updated for you as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our Administrative Services Director for that update, real-time update. Thank you. Okay, well, wonderful. With that, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries 4-0. Wonderful. And that brings us to item D, which is items for the good of the city. And the first one is the one for which I see very many people in this audience, which is a proclamation recognizing Orinda resident and many of our math teacher, Patty Hung, Mrs. Hung, as the first woman to run the Boston Marathon 37 consecutive times. So Patty, we are just so honored that you would come to our city council meeting where we can share our congratulations, our adulation, our adoration, our congratulations, everything, that our great respect and thank you to you. And we have worked on a proclamation for you that, as you will see, it's not just one page, but really it's 2 pages. And some of the people in this room have been part of writing this. And if everyone would indulge us, perhaps we could read some of this. And I would ask that maybe perhaps we could bring up some of our former mayors in the audience to perhaps read this together. I see Amy Worth and I see Eve. In addition to being mayors, both were very involved with Mrs. Hung on the cross-country field. And would any other council members like to also come down and participate in the reading? We can all do this.
Sure. Sure.
Wonderful.
Or audience members who. Okay. Perhaps former students instead.
Patty, known as in the class, and Patty everywhere else, brings legendary boundless enthusiasm to all her adventures, consistently raising the spirits of all around her.
Whereas Patty has inspired thousands of students to dedicate hard work to reach their athletic potential. Looks like we have some new candidates out here. Are inspired and personal dedication to the sport of running, and whereas Patty continues to bring warmth, humor, and engagement to inspire personal and professional accomplishments for coaching and editing. And okay. Whereas Patty has just completed her 37th Boston Marathon, holding with its consecutive completion record in historic event. Well known for its skills and a very fantastic community spirit. And whereas Patty has brought great pride to the city of Orinda and its many records, incredible note is that the 11th coast and dedicated competitor of the Boston Marathon. And whereas wonderful support every year by friends and Jamie Christie Marathon is in fact only a small part of the draw of the Orinda community who cheers her on every year in the fall. And whereas over the years, as a fall settled on year long again, Patty coached hundreds of students of a wide range of running and built a constant team of well-being and race policy, showing the championship comes to the dedication, which is all and I'm very happy. Whereas as the teacher and prospective coach at Vermont High School, Patty left an incredible impact by sharing the joy of running on a generation of runners, some of whom even got to run into her years later while running Boston. And whereas as a running coach, Patty inspired her athletes not because she would be unhappy or disappointed if they didn't perform, but because of her unbounded excitement if they exceeded their own expectations. And Patty's coaching has inspired countless students to excel in all aspects of their lives through her tremendous dedication to coaching and teaching. And whereas Patty's miracle and record may serve inspiration to people around the world for what they can accomplish in dedication and self-discipline as individuals. And whereas Patty's exceptional talent and dedication is critical from running to fast. Now there's where even though on behalf of the Orinda Youth to congratulate Patty on her extraordinary inspiration and talent. You make us better students, runners, and
as you can see, Patty has inspired much in this community and much beyond the individual and about supporting the community. And you can see there's a number of mayors here who she has been a large part of them being here and growing. And I'm guessing that's the former mayor Phillips that ran the Boston Marathon with her coach and my coach, Mrs. Hung. So thank you, Patty Hung. Thank you for all that you have done. Is there anyone who would like to come up and say anything further? All right. Well, I think that they felt that we went on with our proclamation, which is there in the city folder. So thank you so much. Thank you, Patty. And our next item is D2, proclamation declaring June 2023 as LGBTQI+ Pride Month in the city of Orinda. And many may have seen our new Pride flag this year, which we're very proud to have. And it has the new pattern for the flag. And failing to come up with the new word for it, the progressive flag. The progress flag. Thank you. It's words go away when you're sitting up here. So thank you to whomever called that out. And I brought up on my screen because of that, and that words go away. Some of in case there was people who weren't aware of what the new stripes on the flag represent. And we have the brown and the black stripes to reflect color, people of color, and recognizing the struggle, especially for people of color. And also we have it's the pink and the baby blue and the white representing trans people. And so these are new additions to the flag, and we honor that. And we have a proclamation here this evening declaring the month of June 2023 as LGBTQI+ month, Pride Month in the city of Orinda. So thank you. Okay, do we have any comments on that item? Okay, well, very good.
Thank you, Mayor Miller, for initiating that.
Council, and thank you to the community for being so supportive of this. And our final, I think we have, our final proclamation of the evening is for the Orinda Historical Society, and they're also going to give us a presentation. So do we have somebody here from the Historical Society for your annual report? Oh, and it's their president, Allison. And Allison, who has published a book this year of pictures of historic Orinda. And if you haven't already acquired this book, the proceeds support the Orinda Historical Society. It's lovely, and it's available at the Historical Society. Allison, thank you for just this tremendous work that you have done, and that your team and that your board has done over the pandemic to open this beautiful museum, refreshed and even available during the Thursday night food trucks and on Saturdays for a few hours. And it's just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep. So Mayor Miller, Vice Mayor G, and council members, thank you for inviting me this evening. My name is Alison Burns, and I'm president of the Orinda Historical Society. After being closed since March 2020, when we went into lockdown, our museum finally reopened to the public on December the 1st, 2022. Having taken over as president in September 2020, I took advantage of the enforced closure to bring in the new board members and volunteers who worked really hard to completely turn around OHS by sorting through decades of documents and artifacts and rearranging the museum's layout, generally presenting ourselves as the kind of historical museum that Orinda could be proud of. We are now open every Thursday afternoon, 3 to 5 p.m. to take advantage of foot traffic when the food trucks are around, and the last Saturday of the month from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. during the farmers market. We also open when something else is happening in the library area, for example, when the garden club or friends of the library have a sale, and also if people contact us to do research, we're very amenable. As well as the museum under the library, we take care of the Little De La Viaga train station on Bryant Avenue. I don't know if everybody's seen that. It's near the MASH gas station. That was one of 3 little train stations that were built in Orinda in the 1890s when the California and Nevada Railroad was running. In June 2022, we discovered that 2 sides of the building had been despoiled by graffiti in red paint. We were very grateful to Steve Earhart, Facilities and Parks Supervisor, for immediately getting the station repainted. In August 2022, my book, which Mayor Miller mentioned, Images of America, Orinda, which features 200+ historical photos, was published by Arcadia Publishing, and we have been using this as a tool for promoting the Historical Society. You can buy it in Orinda Books, Re-Chic on Orinda Way, Amazon, etc., everywhere where good books are sold. But if you buy it from our museum, half the sales price will go to help us benefit OHS. I've since been giving a lot of presentations around the book to various societies around the area. In September 2022, we set up our booth at the Orinda Car Show, where I signed and sold a large number of the books, all sales, again, benefiting the Historical Society. I'm sure our success in part was due to Bill Waterman from the Orinda Association, who gave us such a visible location right on the corner of the Orinda Way. One man whose mother had lived in Orinda since 1971 said that this was the first time she realized Orinda had a historical society. I realized when I took over that OHS has the best shop window in town. Here we can show Orinda visitors and residents alike what's going on. So we do change our windows at least once a month. These last couple of weeks, we celebrated Memorial Day. I particularly wanted to celebrate Orinda's veterans, and so I contacted the BFW in Lafayette and also went into the Facebook page. I don't know if everybody knows that, but it's called You Know You're From Orinda If, which is really good to get into, which has over 2,000 members. And I asked people to send photos and a short bio of themselves or anyone in their family who had served in the military. I printed and framed all the photos and you can see them in the museum window. We'll be changing that out in the next couple of days, so please take a look if you can. It's really very touching. Being a Brit, I didn't realize that Memorial Day was for those no longer with us. So I got to correspond with a number of service personnel who were still very much alive. I'll be using all those photos again in November. Do please get in touch if you have one, if you know anybody who would like to have their photo in our windows. We've been very fortunate in getting some very useful grants this year. The Orinda's Women's Club gave us $1,500, which we will be using for desperately needed software and computer updates. The Orinda Community Fund granted us $1,000, which we will be using to install a plaque on the outside of Orinda Motors to celebrate its centenary in 2024. Last year, Teresa Long, our archivist, was successful in getting a grant with California Revealed, a company in Sacramento, which enabled us to have half our collection of Orinda Sun newspapers from 1948 to 1959, excuse me, digitized. This year, the company invited us to apply for another grant so that we could get the second half digitized. As far as we know, OHS is the only possessor of these old newspapers, which were given to OHS when the newspaper went out of business. In November 2022, the Orinda, Moraga and Lafayette Historical Societies put on a well-attended presentation in the library garden room. When I booked the room, I suggested to Jamila Lowe that in the community centre that we might have about 35 attendees. But then I advertised it on this wonderful website that I like, You Know You're From Orinda If, and we ended up with over 90 people in the audience. I would again like to thank the city's maintenance crew for dealing so well and so safely with the unexpected numbers. It was 3 times what we thought. In January 2023, Councillor Janet Riley became the council liaison to OHS. Our monthly board meetings continue to take place on the 3rd Wednesday of the month in the May Room. We continue to get positive publicity in the local press, and we're hoping that this will encourage more people to volunteer at the museum. The more volunteers we have, the more frequently we can open. Our schools program has been closed for 3 years because of lockdown, COVID, but we kicked it off again this May and started small by inviting one of Sleepy Hollow kindergarten classes along. It was a huge success and great fun. All the parents present, as well as the teacher, Mrs. Greer, said that it was the best field trip they had ever been on. We plan to do more once the 2023-24 school year begins. As ever, I thank the City of Orinda for being so involved in helping revitalise the Orinda Historical Society. It has been a huge labour of love to get to this point, and it's not just thanks to the hard work and knowledge and enthusiasm of the board members, on OHS board members, but also in knowing that we can depend upon the backing of the city, in particular the Parks and Recs Department, Todd Trimble, Steve Earhart, Jamila Lowe, and all the maintenance personnel who have made everything so much easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Do we have questions for Allison? Yes, Councilmember Iverson.
I want to say thank you for the school programs. I've had 3 kids come home just bouncy with excitement about the tours that you guys do. And it's a wonderful way of sharing.
Wonderful. Do we have any public comment on the Historical Society's annual report? Okay, well, seeing none, I will deliver to the Historical Society this resolution. Okay, well, that ends our items for the good of the city this evening. So I think there might be some of you that have other plans for this evening, families at home and things you want to do. Of course, you're welcome to stay too, but please don't feel that you need to. We're just so delighted to have people in the council meeting here and sharing. So thank you. Okay, so our next item is the public forum. And the public forum provides an opportunity for members of the public to speak on any item within the jurisdiction of the city that is not on tonight's agenda. It is also a time on which you can speak on an item that is on the agenda if you're not able to stay for the agendized item on which you want to speak. In either case, we do limit public comment as we would on the individual items as well to 3 minutes per speaker as a general rule. And we do have some public forum speakers, I believe, this evening. And please let me know if you wanted to wait for the specific item or if you wanted to speak in public comment. We had Wayne. Okay, wait. So I think we have Sophia, is that your card? Okay, so we have Sophia Camellis, thank you.
So my name is Sophia Canellis, and I live on 4 Ichabod Lane in Orinda. It is right next to Sleepy Hollow. So it's a very, very important street. As Sleepy Hollow right now is under construction or not, our street is constantly used by mothers to pick up their children, whether it's for a fast, quick, or they don't want to go into the parking lot. Either way, our street is very busy, especially during school hours. I live 1 house up from Penny and Ian. They live on the corner. I'm the next house up. He's on the Sleepy Hollow Lane. So he's here, Ian's here, I'm here. And then there's another house. And our problem is we have a lot of water coming off the mountain, especially in the winter. And there's so much water year after year after year. It's gotten worse, not any better. I'm not a builder, but I believe it was just undermanaged from the beginning and there was no proper drainage for this amount of water coming off the back of the hill. And what it has done is created a massive river. It is rapid, it is fast, it's a lot of water. I cannot put out my trash cans. If I do, they'll get wiped away or it'll create such a mess that my whole front yard will, this last winter, all of my dirt went away. So good thing I did not plant anything, which is probably why I've been waiting. We've been waiting for this to happen for some quite time now, for this drainage to be put in from the top of the hill, maybe mine. And then of course, Ian's house has a drainage at the very bottom. But from the very top, the water just comes gushing down. It's about this, we all have videos and pictures to show it. I'm a trainer and I'm a big girl. In other words, I'm very strong. If I'm to step into that water, it will take me. I will lose my footing. And I'm very good. I used to be a ballerina as well. I cannot place 1 foot onto the street with that water. It will just take me away. Unfortunately, Penny herself has suffered where she, a couple of years ago, stepped into it and broke her hip. So that's one major catastrophe, and I'm happy that she recovered. Obviously, I don't want that to happen to me or to Penny again or to any other male or female on our street or any of the children. There's a lot of children that use our street for the Sleepy Hollow School. And this water comes along and the kids like to play in it because it's a river. It's a lot of fun. It's rapid, but it's very dangerous. And I think that after so many years, it needs to be accounted for. I know it was budgeted. We've lived now in Orinda at the same place. Ian's lived a lot longer than me there. We've been there for 20 years. We've been dealing with it, but it's getting worse and worse and worse. And every year it's gotten worse with the water just coming down. It makes it unsafe. I don't know when another accident is going to happen, and I am hoping that there will be no more.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank
you for that. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to speak at this time versus at the Capital Improvement. Okay, got it. So if you come up, yes, please go ahead.
So my name is Rob Anderson. I live at 86 Sleepy Hollow Lane, which is basically perpendicular to the water that's coming down. So there is a drain at the bottom of Ichabod. And what's happening is not only that river they're talking about, the water that comes down, it takes down the debris as well. And that's really what's happened. That's gotten worse over the years, I think, but it clogs it up. And then that water just continues really into my front yard. The city helped us out a couple of years ago. We did get flooded. There's a few $1,000s of damage to our yard. So we did put some berms on the driveway on the side to try to misdirect the water or direct the water down the street. It doesn't work. There's just too much water that comes down if I don't get out there and clear the drains. So what happens is when the big rains come, when the big storms come, if I'm not there actively going out and clearing the drain with the rake and shovel, I mean, it's pretty hilarious actually. If you saw me, I'm in my snow gear, I'm all up there trying to get it all done. But if that doesn't happen, it's going to go into my yard. And it's already happened once. I suspect it could happen again. It has gotten worse. I don't know why it's getting worse. There's more debris that's coming down. And that's really what clogs everything up. And another thing that happens too is that water, when it comes down, our neighbors down the street that are not here, they have sandbags everywhere because that water gets pushed down their direction down the street. So they get it in their driveways and all kinds of things like that. I think that's it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that. Thank you for your comments. And Penny, did you want to speak on this item or did you want to speak at the time of the capital improvement? Okay.
I'm Penny Baird. My husband is Ian, and we live at 89 Sleepy Hollow Lane, right on the corner of Sleepy Hollow and Ichabod Lane. Once again, I'm requesting the city to take action as a safety precaution in a situation on Ichabod Lane. We and other residents on the lower section of Ichabod Lane truly need a storm drain inlet structure underground catchment area where Ichabod Lane curves to the left below the property owned by Gareth and Jackie Noyes. Gareth hoped to be here, but he's on a business trip. As far as we know, this need was present even before we bought the property in 1976. Once again, during recent storms these last several months, water has poured down Ichabod Lane, down the gutters on both sides, but more so down the right-hand gutter. Sometimes the path of water is so wide you can't jump over it and have to walk through it. This is the case for both adults and the many children going to and from school. My husband has photos and I have photos that I gave before, but if you want other, duplicates, I can present them. During every storm, and also after the rains have ceased, the Bairds and the Andersons, who live on Sleepy Hollow Lane at the bottom of Ichabod Lane, have to constantly clear the drain access at the bottom of Ichabod Lane and the drain on the right-hand corner of Ichabod Lane of debris, wood, mud, boulders, really big stones. The need for this is twofold. Piled up debris there is a safety hazard for cars turning the corner from Sleepy Hollow Lane onto Ichabod Lane. It is especially dangerous at night and also when school finishes and children are walking to meet parents and the street is lined with cars. If not cleared, the water will cross Sleepy Hollow Lane and flood the Andersons' garden and home. A previous owner of that property built a concrete wall to help prevent this. Another problem we have when this volume of water pours down Ichabod Lane is that the stormwater, blocked by wheels turned in to the curb by all the cars parked on both sides of the street sometimes, gushes up and washes away laid gravel and soil on the nature strip and garden. This year alone, we have had to replace the gravel twice. On April the 23rd, 2019, my husband and I appeared before the City Council. I was on a walker after hip surgery in March, which was the result of me slipping on algae on Ichabod Lane and falling, and was told at that time it would take another 3+ months before I could safely walk again without a walker or cane. Since that time, we have been told the city clears the street of algae, but that truly is not enough. I would like to quickly read that presentation to you. Okay, you've heard it before. We really need action, before more accidents happen. And I don't think it is right for residents to have to constantly clear that corner in order to keep the place safe and in order for the water not to go onto people's property and have property damage. So please, please do something about it.
I think we also have a comment card from Ian Baird.
My name is Ian Baird. Penny and I live on the corner of Sleepy Hollow Lane and Ichabod Lane. And the drain inlet structure that we are requesting that you put in the budget is already in the CIP. It's already in the CIP. It was put in there last year or the year before. So please just move it from the CIP to the budget so it gets done. So there's a drain inlet structure on the first curve of Ichabod Lane. So because some of the water that comes down, I've seen, because of the crown in the road, I've seen the water above the crown of the road, maybe an inch above the crown, meaning there's a lot of water coming down Ichabod Lane on both sides because it's crowned. And so if you could put a drain inlet structure there at the top of the first curve, I'd really appreciate it. That's it. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, and these, and then I also have another, this is the last of the speaker cards I have on Ichabod Lane, Sleepy Hollow. Okay. And then I have one other for public forum, which is for Wayne, and I'm not sure how to say your last name. So I see you're coming up though. So you realized we were referencing you. Thank you.
My name's Wayne Tunick. I want to thank you all for your service. I know you're here in your jobs and tonight because you care about Orinda quality of life and safety. And the issue that I want to bring up is one that affects both quality of life and safety, and that's the increasing Orinda traffic congestion. Okay. Orinda traffic congestion is made up of 3 elements. The first is volume of traffic. There's nothing we can do about that. The second is traffic lights. We choose to do nothing about that. And the third is the enormous amount of lane closures for construction, cutting trees, and et cetera, that need to be scheduled and consolidated to limit that. So let me get into specifics. This chart here is basically goes from Moraga on Moraga Way all the way to Camino Pablo, 5 miles. Anybody want to guess how many lights are on that? 16. That's a lot of lights, okay? None of those lights are timed properly. None of them are coordinated. Orinda's traffic problem is self-inflicted. They need to be coordinated. They need to be timed. Now, I'm going to give you 2 specific examples. The first one is on Moraga Way and Glorietta. Okay. That light is a big light because Moraga Way takes you to the high school, the only middle school, and 2 elementary schools. Between 8 and 9 in the morning, that light stays on for 40 to 45 seconds. It gives equal precedence to Glorietta. That's not right, okay? The second one that I'm going to talk to you about is El Toyono. That light, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, 38 seconds. And if you're lucky enough to get through it, you're immediately stopped a few hundred yards away on Minor. Why? Because that light's not timed with the previous light and they're not coordinated. I've tried to call the city engineers. They were uninterested in doing anything. That's why I'm here. And I have 4 recommendations. The first is do the analysis. You will see that you do have a problem that can be fixed. The second is go and fix the lights. Manually set the timing properly. Get the engineers to do their job and go out there, okay? The third is that there is commercial software you can buy to set up your whole traffic light system on that 16 light 5 miles to optimize the flow of traffic. Okay, I don't know if you own it. If you don't, you should buy it and the engineers should work it. And lastly, you should coordinate making Moraga Way a 1-lane road by consolidating the stoppages and perhaps doing them at times that there's less traffic. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I will share that we have our congressman was able to acquire for us a grant for the smart signal program that we're working on. So thank you. Okay, well, that's the last I have of speakers for public comment for whom I have cards for. Is there anybody else here or do we have anyone online who would like to speak?
Not.
Okay. Then we will turn to
request. Because they mentioned that the Ichabod Lane drain is in the CIP, I would just ask whoever's presenting on the CIP and budget to just please mention that whenever the presentation is going, just so we can kind of foot to the where it is.
Any council member wants to pull. Okay.
I didn't see any public comment on any of the items on the consent calendar, and I just wanted to verify that.
Correct. Okay.
Do we have a motion on the consent calendar?
Approved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries 5-4-0, and that moves us on to adoption of F2, which is adoption. I'm sorry. It moves us on to G1, our first public hearing, which is public hearing to confirm the diagram and assessment for the Orinda Street Lighting and Landscape Assessment District number 1986-1, zones L42, M9, and M11 for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our Public Works Director will provide a brief staff report, but this is the third and final step in the annual update of assessment. So Scott is coming up.
Good evening, City Council. And this, as you may recall, is the third step in the process, which involves then the first step was directing the utility engineer, so to speak, to prepare the assessment report. The second step was to receive the report. And now that we've done that and approved it, this third step is then to hold a public hearing and confirm that the diagram is correct and that the assessment districts that are covered by this particular item be levied then for the next fiscal year. So this covers 2023, 2024 fiscal year. And the escalator is basically the CPI to February for 1 year, which is 5.3%. So there's three districts involved, the L42, the M9, and then the M11. There are three diagrams or maps in the report that show where these are located. L42 and M9 are both residential street lighting. M11 has some residential street lighting, but has more, I would say, commercial and not industrial, but institutional type lighting that's assessed then. The difference between these, well, the other difference is on M11, we don't only have street lighting, we also have landscape and street sweeping included in those. The difference with M11 is it's because of the timing of when that was established and so forth, it does not enjoy, so to speak, the yearly escalation depending on the inflation. So it's set back at a rate in the past, which, you know, the voters have not approved, I believe, when it was perhaps considered in the past. So it's a fixed amount that can be charged, which is this $635.94 per unit then. So we're not raising that, but since costs do increase, then the amount the city has to contribute basically varies somewhat depending on what the inflation actually is and so forth and what the expenses are. In any case, it's fairly routine. We're asking then council to go ahead and formally approve the resolution, which would then enable the engineer, which is that consultant that we use that's done this for us many years. Then they would go to the county and handle the actual assessment along with their report, request the assessment and handle that portion of the work for us as our agent. So that concludes my report. And then the next step, if you have questions, of course, I'd be happy to answer those. And then you would hold a public hearing for that purpose.
I have a question and it may not be appropriate. So if the city attorney tells me it's not appropriate, we'll include it at another time. But as our public works director mentioned, those of us that have been around a while know that, you know, every year that goes by, the city subsidizes M11 more and more and more. I'm just curious, as we look at new development, as we look at new zoning, is there any possibility? I'm not sure I've ever completely understood the legal document that you know, results in that. And it's always been my understanding that the owners wouldn't vote to increase it. So I guess I'm just curious. And if it can't be asked under this item, I'd like to have it addressed in the future.
No, I think it's fine to ask under this item. And again, unless the city attorney, you know, at the time this district was established, it basically covers the two sections of the downtown area, primarily the commercial business district. So they did ballot a number of years ago. It's a property owner balloting where the ballots go to the property owners to update the language to allow for an annual inflationary increase. That was not successful. I think in answer to your broader question, Vice Mayor G, is we talked a little bit about this in the development of our downtown precise plan. And I would think as we begin to see some progress there, some rezoning, we've talked about perhaps looking to update this district as we restore vitality to the downtown, and people might be willing to contribute more if they're seeing benefit from those actions. And then also, you know, even further, maybe we would look at a business, what are called business and parking improvement district that could step into this and also manage shared parking. So as we implement the downtown precise plan, I think there will be an opportunity to revisit this because our goal is to make, you know, it much more of a successful area economically. And then I think you would perhaps see the property owners willing to share some of these costs as they benefit from those actions as well.
For bringing that up. It's something we have to remember because as time goes on, we are showing the value for our work down there, and it's getting closer and closer to time to share with the property owners what more we can do with their increased support. So do we have any members of the public who would like to comment on this item? No. Okay.
Not online.
Okay, very good. So then we'll bring it back to the council. Oh, well, we need to, we open the public hearing. Is that correct? Oh, Okay, well, okay, when I asked for public comment, we were opening the public hearing. Another chance. Does anyone wish to speak on this item in the public hearing? Okay, we don't have anyone online. All right, thank you very much. So we'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it back to the council for deliberation. I'll kick it off then and say I definitely share the thought that that there is a time. I share the thought that, you know, the city is contributing in this direction. Obviously is assisting this district, and I really do feel that it's important for us to go to the businesses when we're able to show them some value for it. You know, there was discussion during the pandemic about some parklets and that sort of thing. And as that becomes, and as we're able to kind of roll out, I think, the downtown precise plan and be able to show property owners the value that they can receive by, you know, better infrastructure downtown and, you know, more trash pickup and more lighting, and all of those things, that I think it would be really wonderful if we can share with them the benefits of increasing that assessment and what more we can do with it. I'm seeing nodding heads from staff. I don't know if they wish to add anything. Okay, very good. Okay, do we have a vote on this, a motion on this item?
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to move that we adopt resolution 38-23, confirming the diagram and assessment for the Orinda Street Lighting and Landscape Assessment District for zones L42, M9, and M11 for fiscal year ending June 30, 2024.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries 4-0. Okay, well, thank you. So that moves us on to our second policy matter. I'm sorry, that moves us on to our first policy matter for the evening, which is our proposed biennial budget 2024-2025. And
Thank you,
Vice
Madam
Mayor.
Mayor. I'll lead off this evening. So June is budget season, so we appreciate the opportunity to discuss with the council our proposed two-year budget. The city of Orinda does adopt a two-year budget, as you'll hear from our Administrative Services Director later. That two-year cycle is you'll approve a budget for the first 2 years, for the next 2 years, the 23-24 and 24-25 fiscal year. We then also do a mid-year review of the current fiscal year. We do that in about March, and then we'll do a mid-cycle review where we'll update numbers before the start of the 24-25 fiscal year. So this is an annual cycle that we go through, and we do regular updates. I'm sort of stealing some of Doug's thunder at the moment. But this year, when I arrived at the city just over 2 years ago, that was just as our prior Administrative Services Director, Paul Rankin, having worked with former City Manager Steve Solomon, had pretty much developed the budget. So I was engaged at the end, but didn't really have enough time under my belt to look at perhaps how we might improve or do budgeting a little bit differently. So this year we are working, having worked with our new Director of Administrative Services, am introducing a new approach to budgeting, which I hope the council and the community find that it'll work well for you. So this evening we'll spend a little bit more time introducing that and walking through that. But basically, at a very high level, the base budget, especially the general fund, well, our budget includes other funds, Measure R, gas tax, a number of other funds. The city has numerous funds. The main focus typically is on the general fund because that's where our base services come from: policing, parks and recreation, those types of activities. So the main focus here is on the general fund component of the budget. And our general fund is not a very large budget, but it is $16 million. We're a low to no property tax city, so we have to be very considerate, take into consideration that, and approach budgeting a little bit differently, perhaps, than some other communities that have more resources. We operate with a very lean staff. I think we just over 35 budgeted positions, doesn't include the contract sheriff's department. But for a city of 20,000 with 35 full-time staff is actually a relatively low number. But what you'll see that we've done in the base budget for the 2 years is Doug working with the department heads. It's very much a base budget. There's nothing new proposed in there. We just add in unavoidable cost increases. Our employees are scheduled to get a COLA July 1st, a cost of living increase. We know our insurance is going up. We know certain other costs go up. So we do scrutinize their base budgets, but there are some increased costs incorporated there, but no positions or no additional expenditures beyond what the council had approved in prior budgets. And then this year, the way I'm approaching it differently is prepared a series of what we call decision packages. And there's really three types of decision packages. So any proposal to increase the budget or increase revenue or decrease a budget for me as the city manager is encapsulated in a decision package. And we'll walk through those in a little bit. And there's a narrative description of each of those in the budget document. But basically the idea would be is the council will you can pick and choose from those. Of course, I'm recommending a series of them. I hope at the end of the day that you'll accept my recommendations, but that's up to the council to whether you want to do that, do something different, and also add other council generated items, which we'll discuss in a minute, which are called budget referrals. And so the three types are operating decision packages, meaning basically if we increase an expense, unless we make an adjustment in the future, like by adding staff or some other costs, that continues until you make a change, right? And we can always modify budgets in the future. The second item is there's one alternate decision package, which is presented because there was been some discussion about whether we could afford additional police staffing. And I think what at least we see as staff is not at this point in time, other than one community services officer position, I am recommending that we add into the budget. And then finally, what are called fund balance decision packages, which basically come out of one-time monies or revenues, our reserves above our established reserve goal of 50% of the general fund budget. And many of those recommendations are actually to top up other reserves like our road stabilization fund and a few other items. Because those funds, previous councils have established to sort of set aside money for unanticipated events or longer term needs. They're only funding sources when the general fund has some extra money and you can add to those sort of designated savings accounts, if you will. And then finally, the other element is what we call budget referrals. So the council, for example, recently did a strategic planning workshop. And as part of that, there were 10 or 12 items that came up where the council said, gee, we should consider these as we're looking at financial resources. Budget referrals can be very specific, an idea to add an expense or a capital project, or they also generate as an opportunity to have a policy discussion about whether or not this is something the council as a whole might do. So for example, this evening, you'll see there are, and I'll walk you through these in a moment, there are budget referrals that came out of the strategic planning session. But tonight a council member might say, what would it cost us to add, I'll pick an example. We wanted to add a child care coordinator to the city's Parks and Rec staff. That could come back at your next meeting as additional budget referral ideas suggested by the public as well, if they're not captured somewhere else in the process. And then finally, what we'll walk you through this evening as well is what we present and call a general fund budget balancing worksheet. It describes our available funds in our reserves, the other designated reserves we have that flow from the general fund, and then how much one-time money and ongoing money we expect to have based on the base budget we've presented to you, where we've ended the prior fiscal year, and then how these decision packages and budget referrals would impact that. And in a moment, we'll walk you through that, but the goal is to make sure we aren't spending more ongoing money than we have in a single fiscal year, and that we're making sure we're keeping reserves and not spending more one-time money than we have available. So hopefully as we walk you through this evening, it'll become a little bit clearer, but I do think it's a very transparent tool. The city's always been very transparent in its budgeting. The budget messages have always described this, but the goal here, there's really a 2-page sheet that really highlights reserves and what changes are being proposed. And it allows the council on the 20th, if you're able to adopt the budget on the 20th of June, your next meeting, we'll have that up live and you'll be able to say yes and no to a number of those decision packages and budget referrals. And we'll be able to show you live that we, how much money we have left. And we'd always recommend that we don't deficit spend, though again, strategically, sometimes if we have enough reserves, we might want to bridge for a year or two if there was something where the council deemed that was desirable. And one example of the decision packages, for example, adding some additional staff to advance our pretty aggressive capital improvement program agenda, but that can only move forward if we have some additional public works staffing, especially if the council agrees to add additional capital improvement projects like the Wilder trail connection from the downtown to Wilder, or really move forward in a more decisive manner on the community park master plan implementation, where we may have some community partners want one part of that. And this will be, we'll walk you through all of this. So that's the idea, is introduce something in regard to the general fund, a little bit different way of doing the budgeting. I think the other good news is that we do have some one-time monies available to invest. And we also will have some additional ongoing revenue where we can make some strategic decisions about where to invest those, as far as what are the councils, and as staff, we try to target those to the 5 and 6 council strategic priorities. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Administrative Services Director, who will walk you through a more detailed presentation, and I will chime in a little bit later.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Doug Lesio, your Administrative Service Director. David did cover a lot of this, so I'll try to get through the slides pretty quickly. Everything on this slide, he actually covered. We do a 2-year budget. We're about to wrap up the previous 2-year budget. We have about 24 days left in the fiscal year, and then we're on to the next budget cycle. The next thing is, and David hit on this, is this proposed budget's a base budget, which provides a similar service level as fiscal year 2023. And the budget supports the City Council strategic priorities, which were adopted this calendar year. If we could advance the slide. One. So the next slide will show that the capital improvement program is a second document. It'll be discussed tonight as a separate agenda item. The biennial budget appropriates CIP project spending for 2023-24 fiscal year and the 24-25 fiscal year into the operating budget. So when you adopt the 2-year budget, you're actually setting appropriations for CIP projects also. The CIP is a 5-year document. The 3 years that fall after the budget cycle are forecast periods, and there's no formal appropriation that occurs. We'll see if this reaches. Great. Then let's see everything on here. Nope. There we go. All right. So significant accomplishments. I'm sorry, I have the wrong fiscal year at the top. That should be 22-23. Obviously, you're aware of the significant accomplishments, approval plan Orinda, including the housing element, the downtown precise plan, the updated safety element and evacuation route analysis. The city's pavement index as of 2022, but just released this year, shows us at an index of 84, which is a terrific rating, second highest in the Bay Area. The wild provider prevention, emergency preparedness, education outreach program has been established, and the additional dedicated staffing has been provided. The city council updated strategic priorities, and we've completed a number of key capital improvement projects. I listed a couple there. And then an item that isn't on the list, but is a fairly significant accomplishment for the past year was the winter storm response. We had a really severe winter storm period, which resulted in a number of items that need to be addressed and repairs occur. Right. So this is a very high level summary of what we're proposing for both fiscal years. You can see the general purpose general fund column for year 1 shows we're expecting total sources of a little over $16.25 million. And right now our proposed budget for expenditures out of the general fund is only $15,200,000. The column next to it shows all the other city funds consolidated into one item. So some of that is operating in nature. As David had mentioned, gas tax, Measure R, things like that have a capital component, but also an operating component. You'll see that we're actually have about $12 million worth of sources, but over $20 million worth of proposed expenditures. We've built up some fund balance in some of these funds, saving up for projects. And so actually appropriating more than you're expecting in revenues is not uncommon, particularly when you're dealing with capital projects. So that's a planned event. A lot of times you, again, squirrel away resources to build up enough to spend on capital. And that's what's happening in the first year. We'll spend about $8 million more than we're taking in those other funds. And a lot of that has to do with built up fund balances and funds that we use for capital. In year two of the proposed budget, you'll see the general fund expected revenues about 16.5 million. The total uses is about 15.5 million, although the structural gap there is slightly smaller than the first year. The first year is a little bit over $1 million. The second year is slightly under $1 million.
Doug, just real quick, rather than a structural gap, that is a surplus.
Yes.
Right. Sorry.
That's correct. So it's a surplus. And so I'm fairly conservative when I do revenue projections. It's one of the reasons why the surplus sort of shrinks a little bit in the second year. I'm not as comfortable with the economy and what it might do with our sales tax revenue and some other factors. So I sort of projected those to be relatively flat until we have a little more information. So the good news is the general fund, we have a balanced budget for both years and actually have a surplus of close to $1 million for both years. Okay. So this next slide is just a graphical representation to give you an idea of how much we rely on property tax here. It's a significant portion of our income in the general fund. And the next biggest piece is fees and charges. Fees and charges is made up primarily of park and rec fees, but there are some development related fees collected by the planning department and engineering. All right, this is analysis of the previous page. It basically states what I just said. Property taxes are a major revenue source, and we're subject to economic cycles, and that fees and charges are primarily parks and recreation revenue. I don't know why the slides are showing up like this on my computer. They show up very different. So we might have a slightly different version of PowerPoint that this is running on, because there should be dollar figures and the labels should be a little further off. But it just gives you an idea of where the city spends its general fund money. Police, park and rec, and public works, and no surprise there. Three very important things that we provide for the community, and that's where a majority of our money gets spent. Right. Of the operating expenses, 80% of it is a combination of contract services and staff salaries and benefits. Of the contract services, the biggest piece is the police budget, because we contract for police services. In the category of special department expense, those include internal service fund charges for risk management, fleet replacement, debt service, and some other non-departmental items. All right. As David mentioned, the proposed staffing increases by one full-time equivalent position between the year we're in and next year. That was actually approved in March of 2023 as part of the mid-cycle budget adjustment. That additional employee is a recreation coordinator position, which I believe has been hired and filled. And so the person, I think, is, Todd, if they started? They just started. So that's pretty great news.
And just to add, that was a reinstatement of a position that was eliminated during the pandemic. So
our total city staffing, excluding contract public safety folks, is 36.5 full-time equivalent positions. And just as a point of context, this remains below the prior high of 38 FTEs that the city had in the budget in 2017-18. The budget document also includes specific data about Measure R. Although Measure R is a general tax, and for financial reporting purposes, our annual comprehensive financial report, it's consolidated into the general fund. But for budgeting and planning purposes and analysis purposes, we track it separately in Fund 106, so that you can judge the work that's being done and help provide plans and program the revenue. So one of the items that got updated was the long-term projection for Measure R. We had one of our members of the public call to our attention that the 5-year projection looked a little odd, and he was correct, it was. This slide reflects the update you received as a late council communication, which shows that the Measure R fund spends, is taking actually a pretty good deal of money, about $3.8 million a year. I think original projections were about $3 million a year. So we're doing really well on the revenue end of things. This shows operating expenditures. Almost all the operating expenditures out of Measure R are for wildfire prevention programs. So if you look at the line that right there, the operating expenditures, we're spending about $1 million a year on wildfire prevention programs. You'll see the big spike in 2023, 24 by a couple $100,000. That is the pilot incentive program that was approved during this fiscal year for $400,000 until it was gone. We believe we'll probably issue about $10,000 worth of incentives this year. So we rolled $390,000 that remained unspent in the pilot program into next year's budget. You'll see that there's a good number of capital projects that occur out of here, but there's also a healthy ending fund balance that gives opportunity to pursue new wildfire prevention programs or other capital improvement programs as we see fit over the next several years. All right. Also in the budget is the American Rescue Plan Act grant funds, or ARPA. The city received about $4.8 million in payments. In the 2-year budget, we have an appropriation in operating over the 2 years of about $250,000 for IT enhancements and about $170,000 for record management effort enhancement. We have outdated IT systems and record management systems that need significant overhauls. Those are shown in the operating budget. The rest of the funds are programmed as capital improvement. There's over $3.5 million for priority storm drain projects. We expect all that construction will actually occur in fiscal year 23-24. And then there's about $700,000 that's been appropriated for city facilities repairs and improvements. And again, we're hoping that we can get that work done in fiscal year 23-24. One of the rules that came with this money is that the city is required to obligate the funds by December of 2024 and expend them by December of 2026. So.
But would just like to acknowledge that there has been discussion in Congress about clawing back unexpended funds. We're monitoring that quite closely. And as I mentioned, the budget message, if we do see that the deadlines change, we're prepared to bring back and recommend the council alternatives that would ensure we use the funds here locally before they would be clawed back. So.
And from there, we have the introduction of the budget balancing tool. As David mentioned, this is a spreadsheet that we will be able to display live at the June 20th council meeting. And as decisions are made, we'll be able to update the spreadsheet to give you an idea of what available resources remain to be programmed or not. This is just a stagnant copy. This also reflects the updates from what was originally published in the agenda packet. Sometimes as we're rushing to get things published, I didn't get the latest, greatest version in the agenda packet. And so I sent out an updated copy. And so that what's on the screen, very hard to read, but reflects the most current information. And I believe that you should have a hard copy.
And
And
it's this replaces page 229 and 230 in the agenda packet. So thank you, Doug. Thank you for that update.
well, I'm available to answer any questions about the information I covered or about the operating budget in general. At this point, I would actually hand it back to David to talk about decision packets and the budget balancing tool.
Thank you. So Doug, if you can keep this slide up, even though it's very hard to read, I'll try to walk through at a very high level. So, what we do is we start with not even the current fiscal year. We start with available cash that we had as of June 30th, 2022, or July 1st, the starting fund balance for 2022, the fiscal year we're in currently. And then you'll see there a little over $11 million. And then the council's got designations already in effect for a number of reserves, including our general fund reserve, which by policy of the council is at 50% of the operating budget of about $16 million. So to that, we add down below. So that shows basically up to about $2.3 million of available, what we consider to be one-time money of fund balance above the established reserves. And then we add to that a little over $2.2 million of where we expect we're going to end the current fiscal year. And so that's basically the 22-23 fiscal year. We won't have that closed out and all bills paid till July or August. And then that number gets verified by our auditor. So that's usually not available until later in the fall. But we think this is a pretty good estimate based on where we are year to date. We do treat that surplus as one-time money unless we've been able to institutionalize it, those savings or those higher revenues that do generate that. And Doug will be able to talk a little bit about what comprised that surplus. Basically good news, but it's things like vacancies in the police department, revenues coming in higher than budgeted, other expenditures not being made during the fiscal year. We had other vacancies in other departments that we weren't able to fill, for example. But what I just want to note here, so there's a total of all those items, and then there's a column which is ongoing and one time. So we basically treat ongoing would be monies that continue to come in or expenses that we would have every year as we operate, unless we changed our programs and activities. And then one time is where we're saying that funds available above our reserve goals would be available to fund other one-time needs. So the middle section of this first page then looks at the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget. And you'll see there it's revenue of about $16.2 million and about $15.1 million of expenditures or two. So that's where we have the $1 million surplus. That would be an operating surplus, if you will. So then, so that gives you the total amount of funding available to the council to allocate of just over about 5.3 million, of which a little over $1 million is ongoing and about 4.3 million is one time. So this is where the decision packages then begin to play in. And I'll go into those in more detail, but the next section is basically the recommended operating decision packages. You see, I've populated those in the ongoing column. There's the one alternate decision package, which would be additional police staffing, sworn officer staffing that isn't there simply because, the budget balancing worksheet wouldn't show as being balanced. But I know that's been of interest to the council and the community. Then if you go to the next page, that's where there's the fund balance decision packages. So you see those all programmed under one time. And there's still money left, assuming the council accepted all of our recommendations as staff. And then you see we capture the council's, at least the initial budget referrals. Some of those have dollar figures, others we need to do a little more legwork, but we do want to hear from the council. Are they things you would like us to do more legwork on in order to flesh those out a bit? Some again are sort of policy items. So for example, there's an item up there that would be doing more retail recruitment. Well, one of the decision packages I'm recommending is downtown, the downtown precise plan implementation, some staffing to do that. And we could have that staff person, which is a temporary staff person we'd like to keep on that worked with us to get the Plan Orinda documents done. But part part of that person's time could be dedicated to economic development and retail recruitment. So this is the discussion we sort of want to have with the council, is how can we accomplish these within existing resources? Others I've been able to say to you, for example, the suggestion we should have a more aggressive legislative advocacy program. Just looking at what some of our neighboring cities spend, that would be about 75,000 a year. So there's a placeholder amount there. And so when we get to the budget balancing, I haven't populated any of those yet, but that would be what the council would say on the 20th, or if we need to, for whatever reason, continue this into July. Let's include decision packages 1 through 5. We're not going to do 6 for some reason. Fund balance decision packages, let's not do 1. And then let's bring in budget referrals 1, 7, 9, and 12. And the bottom line we're going to be looking for is that those numbers in the very bottom line don't go negative, right? That means you've got a balanced operating budget and you haven't spent reserve money that you don't have on activities. So with that, maybe Doug, we can go to the next slide and I'll just walk you through at a high level of what the budget decision packages are. So the other thing I'd like to note is the budget document has a lot of great information for the council and the community and everyone that's interested in that. And it's almost 110 pages, plus the CIP is another document that has a lot of great information. So there is a narrative description of each of these decision packages in the budget. So I'm just going to cover them at a very high level. I'm happy to answer any questions people may have, but there's 5 recommended operating budget decision packages. So employee retention and recruitment, we did a series of stay interviews with our employees. The workplace has changed quite a bit. We've had trouble recruiting and filling some positions. So this is a placeholder for some ideas that we would implement during the course of the year that we think would help us with employee retention and recruitment. Restructure maintenance operations. We have a lot of facilities. We maintain landscaping, we maintain parks. We have a firm that's looking at how we should structure that to make sure we're getting things done, including capital projects in a timely manner. So that report is on its way in. That's a placeholder for some funding to implement whatever their recommendations might be. That's been something the council has been talking with me about since I arrived 2 years ago, and I committed we would step back and look at that and figure out if there's another structure or things we should be doing that would make us more effective in that area. Not that we don't get a lot of things done, but we're being more aggressive in pursuing grants, which are quite often for capital projects. And we have Measure R funding that's going into some capital projects. So the city over time has sometimes added staffing or restructured things, like when we launched the predecessor Measure L to Measure R and the bond program, we actually had some staffing that was in place to make sure we did that. The city did a great, fabulous job of going from a PCI of 47 a little over a decade ago to the second highest in the Bay Area in just over 10 years. Now we're able to bring back one of the staff people that was here for a while, is now filling a permanent engineering position, and Fair's back working with us. So decision package number 3, information technology services. We're becoming more and more reliant on technology. We operate very leanly there. We have a contract IT firm. We're not sure that is meeting all of our needs, especially as we transition to hybrid meetings. And the staff identified in our stay interviews that lack of technology and tools was they found to be a detriment to being able to accomplish their job. So you'll see there's a broader description. This would increase expenditures to have us be more responsive for information technology needs. Police Community Services Officer. We did have a Police Community Service Officer up until 2018. The idea would be to reinstate a position. This would free up sworn officer time to be in the field and doing patrol instead of some of the more mundane duties that a community service officer could do. So that wouldn't add additional police staffing. It would ensure police officers are in the field more. Plus, it would allow us to grow our outreach in regard to policing and policing services, which is one of the budget referrals, is what could we do to engage with policing more? This type of position, working with the police officers, could do more outreach with neighborhoods for neighborhood watch and things like that as well. And then finally, Plan Orinda implementation. The council spent a lot of time, and almost 4 years in total, on Plan Orinda, which was the downtown precise plan, the housing element, and the safety element, plus our evacuation analysis. We're one of the few cities that has an approved housing element in a timely manner. And so the council has said to us, we really want to now give life to all those efforts and make implementation a priority, but it takes resources to do that. So, and then the one alternative decision package I mentioned was we have discussed over time additional sworn police officers, but in order to add one officer to each shift, it would be almost $1.3 million. So that at least shares with the council and the community that cost. That's probably the reason why in the past we haven't seen a movement towards that, as it's a pretty hefty cost to actually increase field staffing. Doug, if you could move on then, thank you. The fund balance decision packages, again, this would be one-time money, and these are mostly, with the exception of 2 items, topping up existing reserve funds, because while we have some reserves above our reserve goal, we have been spending down, for example, the road stabilization fund as projects come up. And I wasn't here at the time, but of course, everyone mentioned the minor road issue that occurred during this winter storm. We had quite a few impacts to roads. We are fairly lucky in that some problems managed not to become sinkholes, but I want to thank our crews for responding to those, and like on Glorietta and I think it was North, for example. But we've got temporary repairs in place. We're hoping those will make those permanent repairs this year. We're hoping we'll get FEMA reimbursement, but we're not always sure that will happen, or that we won't have other things happen where we're not in a declared emergency. We might be able to get funding. And then the long-term planning fund again, well, we just completed the housing element. I was teasing our planning director the other day. We're only about 5 years away from having to start it again. And these types of activities have no other funding source. For example, the council has mentioned perhaps doing an economic development element, which is an optional element of the general plan. So if we have some resources now by setting this aside, that's what we use to fund the whole Plan Orinda effort, was money that had accumulated over a number of years, but we spent almost all of that. Not all of it, but almost all of it. So these are very expensive efforts. And then finally, 2 projects which would advance capital improvement projects that are in the works. One, the council approved not long ago an updated community park master plan to retrofit the community park across the way from the community center, our probably most used park. But we've now been approached by some residents in the Parks and Rec Foundation saying, because it's about estimated about $3 million to complete the park. We were talking about doing it in phases as we got funding. But I'm meeting with a group of residents, including the foundation. They're interested in doing a fundraising effort to perhaps raise the money. Orinda is a very generous community. There's been lots of examples where community fundraising have helped do things like acquire the Orinda Oaks Park and undertake other activities. But in meeting with them, we found we need to progress the design enough to get better cost estimates and look at phasing opportunities to help them with their fundraising efforts. So in my mind's eye, budgeting $50,000 would help us perhaps also be more competitive for grants. We have applied for grants, but the more shovel ready you are, the more points you get in a lot of the state funding. And then if we can facilitate the private fundraising, it would be less disruptive to the park and fewer phases if we could do that. So this would be the seed money that would allow us to hopefully do that. And then finally, as we were discussing the housing element, and it's been on our, I'm going to probably not get it right, but it's in our bicycle, pedestrian, and trails plan, has been this desire to better connect the downtown to Wilder, going up on the Brook. I always get, there's Brookside and Brookwood. This is Brookwood. Thank you, Drummond. Brookwood. There was some preliminary analysis done in that trails plan, but we would like to advance that, do more, a little bit more design there, and begin to pursue grants for that. It's been added to our unfunded list in the CIP. But also even today, we were talking with our grants firm, and there is a potential grant source even to do the planning where this would serve as a local match. And we're going to apply for a grant of about $500,000, which would allow us to take the planning to the next level and hopefully use this $100,000 as a match for that. If not, we'll just do what we can. There's some right-of-way issues we're going to have to assess and things. But the idea too is, well, that would better connect Orinda to Wilder and the sports complex and Wilder to the downtown, it would also advance the Caltrans Gateway site that's been identified as a possible housing site. So those are the 5 fund balance decision packages that, oh, sorry, there's the next page. So there's 6, there's a total of 8. As we talked about earlier, if we're going to be pursuing Wilder, some of these other capital projects, we were looking to carve out 600,000 to add an engineering position for up to 3 years to shepherd those projects. So it would be a reserve now to do that, but that wouldn't be ongoing. But this, we're looking at sort of 3 years to really jumpstart some of these projects. And then finally, we do have an existing capital projects fund. That's where we have general fund money go for projects that don't have another funding source. At this point in time, we're just recommending that we set aside the money because we have the resources. That could be used for things like, again, design work to make us more competitive for grants. It could be used for the local match. Sometimes grants have a local match requirement. We might go out to bid on a project where, as happened last year on the street program, where there may not be another alternative source, but in order to award the project, we need a little bit more money to top that off. A couple of examples there. And then finally, well, we do set aside some money through our internal service fund charges for city facilities and maintenance and replacement. Big costs of replacing HVAC systems, generators, those types of things. This would be set aside to meet some of those needs where the annual contributions may prove to be inadequate. So with that, next slide, I think, Doug. These are the budget referrals. So these are, and what you'll see is, again, there's a narrative in the budget for each of these, but these were recaptured during the council's strategic planning workshop. EV charging stations, and we have been pursuing those by trying to get Tesla, Electrify America to perhaps come in and install facilities at no cost on city sites. So, but that the council expressed an interest in continuing to pursue those, encouraging retail in the downtown, especially in conjunction with the downtown precise plan implementation. Legislative advocacy, I mentioned that earlier. The idea is more and more of our residents sort of work from home or don't necessarily go in the office. Could we develop some type of co-working space, perhaps in the library? Next slide, please. An off-leash dog park somewhere in town that's been looked at in the past. A formal ambassador system for community partners. And again, these were fairly high-level suggestions at strategic planning. So as I understand it, the idea there would be perhaps we have a lot of great community groups here. Orinda is very rich with community groups, from school clubs to Friends of the Moraga Adobe to Friends of the Library, Garden Club. Maybe we develop some type of a program where we could engage people from those groups to be sort of a formal ambassador to the city, go back and share information. Number 7, provide better pedestrian bicycle connections to Wilder. So you can see one of our suggestions is to start on that already. Moving, perhaps having council meetings out in the community quarterly. Implicit bias training, more employees do implicit bias training. It's a web-based program now. The suggestion was we should do that annually to support our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. An equity-based analysis of our personnel and customer service approach. Additional enhanced engagement with the school district. We already do a lot with the school district, but that was one of the lenses the council, 2 lenses the council in adopting their strategic goals said they'd want us to do, is look at everything we do through the lens of equity, inclusion, and equity, and also support for our local schools, which is one of our best attributes here. Public safety engagement, again, can we get the community more engaged in public safety issues, establishment of neighborhood watch groups. That could also be an outgrowth of our efforts in regard to wildfire prevention, working with also the Firewise councils, because there's, a natural connection of neighbors there that we maybe can also engage them in other aspects of public safety. And finally, as we heard this evening, Orinda's a unique mix of public and private drainage. And the idea being that maybe where there are private drainage issues, maybe the city could facilitate some type of assessment through assessment districts or other types of things. So there is a narrative for each of these. There's a few that have some monetary estimates attached to them, but not many of them, because they're a little fuzzy at this moment, but the idea is this meeting, the next council meeting, we could perhaps flesh those out a little bit, and staff would know whether you'd like us to pursue this, or you could say in next year's budget referral number 12, bring back a plan next year to discuss what additional public safety engagement might look like, and maybe that doesn't require a fiscal allocation. So next.
I think that's it.
Okay, that's it for me. I'll turn it back. over to
Terrific.
Doug.
This is fantastic. And I just, before we go to questions, just wanted to please,
Oh,
city manager.
Doug's not done yet. I'm just turning it back to him. if he may.
Okay.
So we're almost there.
So there's a couple more steps in this. Tomorrow evening, the CIP will be presented to the Planning Commission for review with conformity to the general plan. The Independent Library Tax Parcel Oversight Committee and the Finance Advisory Committee will meet on the 13th to give input, and then the SSTOC will meet on the 14th.
So you'll have that formal feedback in time for your next budget public hearing. So.
And then one thing I would add is that the budget message, if there's anything that a member of the public doesn't want to read the whole budget, there's 5 pages. It starts on page number 6 of the budget. It's 5 pages that summarize the city's financial condition, where we're headed, and the process and thoughts that went into developing the budget. And it's a must read for somebody who wants to understand the why behind our budget.
And I would just note, I think in the next slide, Doug, if you could advance to that, the next council hearing on the budget will be the 20th of June, not the 21st. So if anyone's watching from home, we meet on the 20th, not the 21st. So, which is the normal Tuesday.
Terrific. I can't speak for my fellow council members, but I will say that before we get started here, I really appreciated this new layout, the time that went into developing this. No matter how we go forward with it, it's a really interesting way of looking at the budget and budgeting. And what I might suggest is that and I'm sharing this now before we go to public comment and even before questions. My suggestion would be that we actually go through the decision packages, and that each council member just kind of perhaps not I think it would take us probably 6 hours if we were to go through each one and each discuss, but to, as council members, share our thoughts on the decision packages and the budget referrals, because obviously my response to them was yes, right? And of course, there's some decision making to be made in it, because as we go into the budget referrals, there's just not enough to cover everything. And so there are going to have to be some decisions made, and to the process that's on the slide. I think staff thought that tonight would really be kind of laying this out, not really getting into the nitty gritty, kind of hearing from the public, hearing this presentation, and then, wrapping it up at the next meeting when we have the input from all of the commissions and the public. And Councilmember Riley isn't here this evening. She's going to be at the next meeting. I'm not going to be there. And then we have the meeting and so then that takes us to the 4th, the second.
We're going to meet on July 11th. So we're not meeting on the 4th.
11th, but Councilmember Riley's also not available she's not going to be at that meeting as well, correct? Or no, is that wrong? I thought that had been shared with me. So.
Well, perhaps our city clerk might know, but is Councilmember Riley going to be at the meeting on the 11th of July? I think.
June 20th, but not June 21st, but I'm not going to be at June 21st. So then we were thinking that we were both going to be at the next one, but I thought that there was a concern that we weren't both at the next one. Councilmember Riley's at the 20th, 20th. Thank you. It's the 20th. And I didn't just get off an airplane. So 20th, thank you. okay, so is everyone, if everyone's here on the 11th, that's, we might want to consider, maybe everyone feels comfortable, but for that reason, in that we all won't be at all meetings necessarily, I just thought it would be helpful to get everybody's thoughts on the decision packets tonight, in case the council feels ready at the next meeting to pass the budget. And then I just get to share my thoughts on some of them as well. So, and I thought it would be useful just as this being a new process, and it seemed like a very useful tool for kind of directing our thoughts. So if everyone feels good about
Question,
it.
are we going to hear from the public first and then go through some of the stuff? Or did you want to talk and then?
No, I think we'll do council member questions and then open up to the public and then come back to the council. That's okay. Okay, great. Terrific. All right. So council member questions. If we have some, this is an incredible amount of work that was done. Vice Mayor G.
I have one to start. I know we talked about it at our strategic planning workshop in February, but I don't see it captured here anywhere. I think that day we talked about it more incorporated with technology. Our police chief is sitting in the corner, so if he says no, we can just drop this. But we talked about additional cameras for our police department. And I don't see those included in either the technology write-up or the public safety.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, the chief is looking at additional deployment. Our main strategy now is working with existing neighborhoods that have ring cameras and whatnot. So I think we did address that during the public safety update he did. Now that was the council's public safety committee. So certainly I think that's the reason why you don't see any specific cost or things, is that is a goal to expand the camera network, but it's not, we're not looking at necessarily where the city would be incurring any cost.
Oh, but no, I'm talking about, yes, incurring costs, because I'm talking more about the kind of cameras we already have with the license plate readers. And I mean, those have, as far as I can tell, those have been extremely helpful to solving things. So I'm not talking about like the neighborhood getting together and.
No, but I think that, perhaps again, we could bring that back. This would be a good example as a budget referral if we missed that. And then I'll work with the chief to get some base data. But the industry is transitioning with ring cameras and whatnot to not necessarily having as many, city-owned cameras, but utilizing an existing network. So but we can bring that back because we'll capture that as an additional budget referral. So
I don't know about my colleagues, but I would like to see that because I think the community is very interested in that.
I want to also just mention, slight correction, the planning commission meetings the 13th of June also, not the 7th. So I apologize.
Oh, great. Time flies when we're so yeah, that's great. Okay, terrific. Okay, thank you. Do we have other questions?
One, the alternative decision packet about having 3 police shifts to be 1 full-time equivalent around the clock. I didn't understand why it had to be the all or none of sort of 3 people for 24 hours coverage versus just 1 person, 1 shift as part of that choice set.
Well, certainly that is an option. But, really as the way police staffing works, you wouldn't always necessarily be able to have that person at the highest demand times. So it's, the thought was if we're truly going to enhance police services, you would want an additional officer on each shift. During the day, we do have our detectives, the chief and the sergeant is available, but it's just given the way the staffing works, it wouldn't necessarily be that you could always dedicate the staffing to the time that you wanted, given the contractual.
You just said.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you. Police officers work 3 12-hour shifts a week and 1 paid back day every 2 weeks. Every other week. Yes. So every other week. So in order to, and then that sort of rotates. So depending on what shift the officer is, you don't necessarily have an ability to, if you want to have Thursday, Friday, Saturday covered, it's got to fit with the shift schedule, right? So you would have another officer who wouldn't necessarily always be able to target the prime time for that. So that's not a complete disadvantage, but that is just the nature of the way that police staffing works. So.
Working with a contract security firm, I can say what shifts and what dates I would like the contract firm to supply. Are you saying that this is not that model? This is more
Not that
like
model with
an
the
employment
uni-
model?
With unionized employees, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Question. Because it's on the subject. I correct in understanding that the current budget does include the third vacant police?
No, that's just one position. That's a vacation floating position. So we don't have one. It is one vacancy, but it wouldn't be one. It would be a floater that would cover vacations, right, Chief? Can you come up real quick? Sorry. And when they weren't covering a vacation, they would be working an additional shift.
As far as the vacation relief deputy, they would cover when somebody's on vacation. They would also cover that every other Wednesday when the deputy has to they do an 8-hour shift. So they get a total of the 80 hours in the 2 weeks. They work 6 a.m. to 2 o'clock, or they work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So there's an 8-hour period on Wednesdays where we fill it with our traffic unit, flexes his schedule, and the vacation relief would also fill that rather than us paying overtime for that as well. So then when somebody goes on vacation, they fill in for that rather than us posting overtime for it.
And we are still, I understand there's challenges in filling that spot throughout the county, but we are still trying to do that and included that, but as a budgeted position in this budget. Correct. Thank you.
That's already included in the budget, so these anything we're talking about here would be additional positions. Yes.
Thank you.
Did we ask about the cameras before he leaves the mic?
Yes, ma'am. We are currently looking at additional cameras, ALPR cameras. One of the location that we think would best fit is somewhere we currently don't have cameras. There's some issues with powering those cameras due to some of the electricity, not being City of Orinda electricity run by Caltrans or another entity. So I am currently looking into having those cameras solar powered. And if that is something that the company that we would be going through can do that, they do make the technologies there, they do offer it. Do we have enough sunlight in those areas to power those cameras? So I'm currently waiting on a call back from them to see if it is possible, and if so, what are those costs associated with it.
And I'm sorry, can I ask a follow-up? And Chief Sullivan, if given all the competing potential expenditures, if there were sort of not a dream expense, but a modest expense that would still be effective in securing those cameras, including the solar powers ones, do you have any sense of a ballpark estimate of what would be sufficient
As far as the cameras,
in terms of revenue? Yeah.
as far as the cameras go, they're approximately, I think, 2,000 to maybe 3,000 a year.
We're not talking about a huge expense. Okay.
Yes. So that
Thank
type
you.
of expenditure could be accommodated in the proposed
And,
police budget.
and the purchase of those cameras is very minimal. The company comes out, they install them, we pay the fee. And then the recurring cost is a yearly subscription, basically. So.
Very much.
Before you go away,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm hoping to also ask about the community services officer and how that would interplay with cameras in general. It may be the neighborhood cameras, but also as well as the schools. And I'm just hoping to get your perspective since you happen to be up at the podium here.
As far as job duties, this community services officer
can really assist our officers with handling vehicle tows. For example, a vehicle accident, we can get the road cleared. Now we're waiting on those vehicles to get towed. Well, that takes up one, maybe two officers. It's something the community service officer or community resource officer could do the vehicle tows. They could handle all of our evidence transportation. They can handle our evidence locker itself. We could put them in charge of our vacation house check program, where they can communicate directly with residents to get the information, revamp that, rather than 7 other people handling it all at the same time. Somebody dedicated to do that. They can also assist with traffic control. They can assist with writing citations or checking on red flag days on in the areas that we're enforcing parking on the streets on those days as well.
It's, I don't know if that's awesome. I just don't know about police staffing very much. So would that also be a person who might also be kind of a regular contact for the schools? I know OUSD was interested in having consistency among the officers that they work with. And I don't know if that's a way of handling that or if that's a different skill set.
Right. So they can certainly help out with, excuse me, with several aspects of dealing with the schools. But when it comes to handling potential crime reports and dealing with more sensitive matters at the schools, they would not be able to, due to the fact they are not sworn officers.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Got it. Thank you. Okay. More questions? Questions? Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully we have some comment. We'll open the public comment. Oh,
I didn't,
please.
I had
Council member.
more questions, but not for Chief
Malkani.
Sullivan.
I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Am I also, this is more maybe for Doug and our city manager. Am I also correct in understanding that the current budget, before we look at these additional packages, includes all of the proposed CIP projects as is? As proposed as well tonight. I know we're not on that agenda item. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, so in the separate CIP report, the first 2 years, the projects that were recommended there and that we reviewed with the council in a meeting maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago are the ones that would be programmed into the budget. So to the extent that you add any additional capital improvement program elements as you review the CIP, then they would have to be brought in and have funds appropriated to implement those.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's open the public comment on this item. Do we have any? I don't have any speaker cards.
Online.
Oh, okay. Well, we will close the public comment period and bring it back to the city council for comments. Does anyone want to kick off? If not, I'm happy to go through the decision package summary but certainly defer. Who would like to go first? Is there somebody? Oh, please. Yes.
But I'll try
Councilmember
to do
Iverson.
like we did with a prior matter, and I'll just sort of blast through at a high level. And I'll start with just the decision packages piece. Let's see, I like number one of the only ones that I was not enthusiastically on board with was number 2 about restructuring maintenance operations. I believe the city manager knows in his head exactly what he wants to do there. And I was surprised he thinks that he needs $250,000 from an outside consultant to make a staffing recommendation if that was not the implementation plan.
No, that would be to implement. We've already funded the analysis and that's coming forward shortly. So that's a placeholder. And once we have what they recommend, then we'll be going through a process of working with the operating departments, sharing that with the employees and bringing that back to the council. That's, and if you were to include this decision package, it's a placeholder for that review of those recommendations and future implementation.
Just changing an org chart and some job descriptions. Where's the 250,000?
Well, it depends on what those recommendations are. So again, I haven't reviewed those yet, but for example, it might result in us needing to hire a maintenance superintendent, which would be an additional position. But since I don't have those yet, it's just a placeholder amount. So if ultimately
Would be full-time equivalent.
this could be,
hires,
yes,
not
or it
just
could be some
paying a consultant.
combination of other support services and things. We don't have that report yet. So it's a place, it'll be available, but we'll bring that back to the council for particular implementation. So this is really a placeholder. It could be less, but since this has been a high priority for the prior council and this council, I don't want us to have a recommendation and then say, hey, we don't have the money to address what's been identified.
Of moving this along, so I know we have a ton to get
Okay.
through. I support the initiative, but I would like that money to be spent on implementation and not consultants telling
Oh,
you
it's
things you
not
already
for
know.
consultants.
Okay, because that's what it said. The IT, I would just point out that there's 580,000 between number 3 and the item number 3 on the other page, which is a massive budget. So while I support it, I really hope you do better than that budget, especially with cloud-based software instead of enterprise, blah, blah, blah. So I want you to be successful, but please come in under that budget. And everything else, I was very supportive of. And one theme, big yes, yes, yeses to everything. One comment on number 6, the multi-year staffing on expanded capital projects. When we talked about resources for maybe private assessment districts and helping all these residents with private drains and private roads even to figure out how to self-assess and how to deal with deferred maintenance. Those reserves might be places where we can find funding for those projects. So to my fellow council members, one of my big themes is I'm so angry at the state of California for having such a massive deficit and blowing it all. So when we see a big deficit, let's use our piggy bank so that we can deal with, and I loved some of the answers I got about how big our contingency is and our surpluses and conservative revenue assumptions. So I'm very, very pleased with our approach. But to the extent we don't have all the answers, let's use these reserves as the place that we can make informed decisions later. And so let's fund into the reserves, because to me, those are just really nice piggy banks for the future.
And were you, Councilmember Malkani, did you feel good following? Okay, great.
And again, try to go big picture on this. With the decision packages summary, I guess out of the first 5, I think my priorities, were sort of number 1, number 3, with the caveat that I too found that the overall 580 for funding sort of software and potentially, also staffing. We just, in an ideal world, we'd love to have those funds. We don't, I think we just don't have all of that. And, I query whether we could make do then with a half-time staff instead of full-time to do some of this work. In terms and then so 1, 3, and 5 made a lot of sense to me. With number 5, I felt like the plan, Orinda implementation, economic development coordinator, and retail encouragement is all somewhat related. And, I would not like to see all of that as 3. I mean, again, I don't think we have the budget for 3 separate positions. I see that as one position right now, and ideally to build that up. But I think that's very important. In terms of restructuring maintenance operations, I also viewed that as the sort of thing where if we were instead looking at, adding to either our the fund balance decision package number 6, we could maybe add there instead, or view that as a placeholder that could, my understanding is we're looking at an additional staff somewhere, right?
Councilmember Malkani, so I'm looking at number 6. So, and I can't remember which
So
item on
the
one year budget.
restructuring maintenance operations, that was a
got it.
different
Okay.
position and
Right,
that's
the
focused
placeholder.
on maintenance. But
Yeah,
if that's a placeholder, it's a staff position. I think it's a challenge to fund that and also fund, additional staffing to support expanded capital projects. Again, would love to see all of this happen, but we have to make some decisions. So I think there's potentially a trade-off there because of the numbers. And then the policing, I do, I definitely want to see that IT technology support happen. And in terms of the expanded community services officer, I see a lot of benefit towards that type of policing generally. But again, we have limited funds. So that wasn't currently something that I was more iffy about that as a decision package, given some of the other needs we have. I would, defer significantly again to, Chief Sullivan in terms of how much need there is on that right now. I do think that our current assigned officers and our Chief Sullivan have done an incredible job here with very limited resources. I know it's challenging to fill that additional position. And even though we're covering it with overtime, I would love to see that position filled and actually see that money expended. Not only because, I understand it's sort of a relief position, but it would also give our other officers a little bit of a break. And it's a better way to staff. So I'm a little more iffy on that. I'll try to summarize. I would like to see this fund turning to the general fund balance decision packages. I would really like to see number 4, which is a minimal expenditure, happen whenever you have community or members willing to do fundraising for, I think, I would like to see this happen soon and that engagement happen with the Park Foundation. So that's a high priority for me. And I would like to see some reserves go into, if possible, the capital projects fund, which is 700. So this is fund balance decision package number 7. And I would also like to see some reserves or some additional funding go into funding the fund balance decision package number 8, which is facilities maintenance and replacement fund. I think we have a lot of facilities maintenance projects that need to be completed. And but the amounts recommended there, the numbers don't add up. So my recommendation would be to go with a lower amount than 700 for each of those, and maybe 350 or split it between those two. There are a few wish list projects that we are hearing about again and again. I really like the idea of a dog park. And there's also been a lot of discussion, and our residents are very interested in a dedicated pickleball facility. So I think we have to sort of keep that in mind. And then the last thing on the budget referrals, the ones that I am most interested in, I'm very interested in EV charging stations, but I feel like we have to go out and get additional funding for that.
But I think we're only doing the decision.
Oh, we're not doing the rest of
No,
those.
I think do these two. We'll come back to you. Don't you worry. Don't worry, Councilmember Iverson. We'll
Shall
Yeah.
I stop or finish?
No,
Okay, I'm just going through it all.
To go through it all.
Okay. The other establishing an off-leash dog park, budget referral number 5, I'm interested in. Especially if it could be a mix of city funds and maybe some community fundraising there. I'm interested in implicit bias training happening annually, though I'm hoping the cost for that could even be lesser than what's estimated. I am interested in and that was budget referral number 9. Number 10 is an equity-based analysis of personnel and customer service. I'm interested in that because I feel like we do have a need for diversity. And if it's not emphasized, saying that we're going to look at things through an equity lens is only meaningful if we force ourselves to do it. And I think this would force ourselves. But
What is
again,
that? I had no idea what that even meant.
it's a review of existing personnel practices and the demographics and the leadership and sort of where we're at and where we would need to get to be more reflective of, the California's population or the population of those qualified in a personnel in a profession. In other words, if you're looking at all the lawyers out there and you're looking at a firm and it's very top heavy with one demographic.
About our 36 staff. You're not talking.
I
about
am talking
broader-
about, yeah. So I think so to that end, I'm hoping it would be something that would actually not even cost what's put in here as a placeholder. So I think that could be a minimal expend. And I think some of the other stuff is more policy. The private drainage facilities assistance budget referral 13. I read all of that again is also, that's the sort of stuff that if we had build up reserves, which especially building up the road transportation reserves, that would come out of there. Okay.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Malkani. Councilmember Iverson, do you feel comfortable jumping into the budget referrals? Oh, do you want to have some time? Okay, really perfect. Okay, great. Vice Mayor G.
Okay, I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. I'm certainly in favor. I'm talking about the decision packages. I'm certainly in favor of number 1. I'm very much in favor of number 2 because I think this has been a very long-term problem with the city. But what I would like to see here is I would like to see a true understanding of the cost and benefit of it, meaning that I believe if this was reorganized properly, we would potentially save money doing certain things, or we could be more efficient, and I'd like to see what those trade-offs are. I think that's a legitimate question. I would love to see us be so much better at IT, and obviously just trying to do these hybrid meetings is proving that we are a little bit in the Stone Age here. So, but I think what all of our issues are, and I'm guessing that none of us on the council anymore, since we lost former Mayor Phillips, have real serious hardcore technology skills. But I think the big problem I have here is not that we don't need this, it's that we don't really understand what it is we would be getting. Are we, when you upgraded to, say, Office 365, that was very easy to understand what you were doing and why you were doing it. But to me, it's more a matter of explain to me what we're going to be doing and why, because there is an infinite list of things you could be doing regarding technology. So, but do I think we need better technology? Yes. So I am very much in favor of the police community services officer for the reasons that the chief said. I mean, I do actually think that helps our public safety a lot simply by freeing up other officers that are maybe doing something else. I don't honestly get the Plan Orinda thing, meaning that we sort of seem to have to do that anyway. Like I sort of don't get that. I mean, we've got to do the zoning. I'm not quite sure what that really means. So, I mean, obviously I'm for Plan Orinda. I'm not quite sure what that entails. I would love to have more police officers, but in terms of patrol staff, that's just, I think, beyond our budget possibility. Keeping the funds up to date, for rainy day problems, which we have all the time, I think is important. I also agree that I would love to see the park thing go forward if it had a lot of community support. And we've had other things that, where the community has really contributed to it. And if that could be worked out, I think advancing that would be great. I'm only in favor of number 5 with the Wilder thing, if that's fully grant funded. I'm not in favor of anything else. The staffing ones, I'm not sure how I feel about them because I'm not sure exactly what that's going to translate into. The EV charging stations, I think that's great, but I would like to hope that maybe there's more private resources there. Encouraging the retail, I think, sort of I agree with Councilmember Malconey. I think that, or I was in that it's all rolled into the plan, Orinda, and the anyway, maybe there's one resource there, but and then I'll make another pitch for what I'm thinking of in the legislative advocacy. I am not thinking about trying to become an activist city. I am not trying to make us Huntington Beach. What I see is a serious issue that I think we're missing out on, because all of you can only do so much. We have very limited staff resources. And the thing that bothers me the most is what I would like to see is politics and money comes down to numbers and squeaky wheel, okay? And we should be doing a much better job of tapping in and coordinating much more intently with our interested co-parties of thing like East Bay Mud has a very serious professional government relations department. We should be pestering them to be their co-partner to pound for more state money. What I'm looking for is a lot more explanation of things we could do. And I'm looking for a lot more coalition building to demand more state money. I am personally, and if they want to tune into the video, please do. I am personally of the mind that given that our state senator and assembly person live in this community, we do not knock on their door often enough. And I mean that. And I don't think it's because we don't want to. I think it's because we don't have the resources to keep pestering them and pestering them and pestering them. But the state of California, in my opinion, is a gargantuan mess, and we are not getting our fair share of it. Okay. And that's why I want to spend this money to get more resources, because all of you as staff leads can only do so much. And maybe it's because I spend so much personal professional time working in this area, but to me, this is important to us being able to continue to exist in a just, whiplash state government environment that just, it's not getting it better, it's getting worse. Some of the other things on here, I think are, co-working, I don't think is particularly important. I would love to see the dog park, only because I know how many people would love to have it, but I don't know how possible that is. As some of the other things on here, I think, really start to fade away to either things that could be done with very little money, or, maybe are not, that high of a priority relative to some other things. But so that's just kind of big picture.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor G. Back to, I'm happy to go. No, I'm happy to go if you want me to go, and then you go. Okay.
Let's see. I would agree with Vice Mayor G on the fact that most of the budget referrals were things that we talked about as values and things we want to do, but most of them don't cost money. And so for a lot of these, it's not that we haven't defined the cost, it's that they shouldn't cost money. It's what we and you do as part of doing our jobs. And so a few of them though do, and I want to talk about those. So EV charging stations, I actually think that's maybe a revenue opportunity. I don't think we need to dedicate funds to it, but encouraging retail, where part of where that came from is very different from what the planning department does. That was the city of Lafayette actually had a full-time retail broker who was recruiting retail from outside the area and literally like hand picking retailers who otherwise didn't just fall in our laps. And it's not just the local mom and pops, it's really economic development. Now that doesn't need to be a permanent full-time hire. It could be a part-time, a consultant, but I would like to see that be its own allocation of resources and a different person, however that shapes up. Legislative advocacy, I was actually on board before the speech, but I really do think we should spend that money because
And the speech, if you
you had me at the planning session. No, but when I looked at our budget, I was blown away at how much money we have for projects that I was thinking, oh, we're spending too much. Gosh, that's expensive. We don't need it. And it was all paid for with successful grants. And so we must do that. So I think that's one of my top priorities after seeing the effectiveness of it on a small scale. co-working, I would hope that with all of the CapEx going into the community center and the library, we're talking some furniture. It's a very small, it's not TIs, it's like furniture. So I would hope they could find that with project level cost savings, and maybe the library committee could take a look at least pursuing it at some level. And I'd love to talk to people about how easy it is. I don't think that's a big spend. Off Leash Dog Park, would love to see it. And everything else does not cost money that I saw on that list. Back to a few things we talked about. We did talk about beautification of infrastructure. That was one of Mayor Miller's things that I know it's expensive, and apparently there's a lot of rules that you can't make it pretty, but I'd like for us to find some contingency money, or in some of these reserves, opportunities to not forget about that. And the security cameras, it's not a huge spend. I really want to find money for that. And the standalone pickleball courts, not just losing a tennis court, but actually listening. I'd love to see us find money for that. And I did like that extra police hire. I'd understand we have to fill a position also, but that seemed to make a lot of sense.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'll try to go as quickly as everyone did. I just because I'm not going to be here at the next meeting, and if everyone's ready to do the budget, then please, go ahead. Don't hold out for me. Wait back for me. But certainly glad if it does take a third meeting. But okay, so going through these, the decision package one, the employee retention and recruitment. There's obviously consensus on this. This was one of the things that we really talked about at, our retreat, that how important it is that we are attractive to our employees and stay attractive to our employees. That's important. Agree on number 2. It's just a placeholder right now. So we're looking to hear more. And the same with 3, and I like the packaging of 3 and 3 on the next page being, sorry, no, 3 and the one-time funding, is it 7?
Fund balance is number 1 in regard to information technology, the fund balance
Okay.
decision package.
Thank you. So, yeah, right. And so when we're talking about the decision packages, the first page just deals with obviously ongoing costs. And there was a decision package 3 that was about information technology services. It's an ongoing cost. And then I think some of the council members really noted that while we do have fund package 1 under the one-time spends is sort of a corollary thing. And how do we do that? I think Vice Mayor G said it really well, is, we aren't really experts, at least to my knowledge up here. I certainly am not on information technology. And so making an informed decision at this point, I think is really hard as to how we do that. Is it that extra guy in the room, that staff person for part of the time with this extra spend? I don't know. I can understand the frustration of having to call someone on the phone, and if that's not working, or having the contractor be there, and so it's necessary to have a staff person. Maybe I come from kind of a background of thinking, well, people work better in groups. And so I'd hate to just have like this one kind of person who's charged with the duty of being our staff information technology services person, when, we might be able to get a better, more up-to-date, more informed person through a service. But however that shakes out, I think what we're hearing that there was consensus on was really getting more information about how these would work together, the additional spend and this potential position. Number 4, the community services officer. Again, if we could have everything, I want everything on this list. It's one, I'm struggling with. We had a community services officer at one point in the past while I was here, and there was challenges with that position in that how does that interrelate with the sworn? So you have somebody hired by the city versus the sheriff, and there's interrelation topics that make it a little more make it less seamless than it might otherwise be. So if that was something we were going to look at, I just really want us to take a close look at our past experience as well. Plan Orinda implementation, of course, very important, but I'm hearing, does that work? how do we do that? I really like the idea of just jumping ahead of the retail broker. I think it's a really great idea to have a cheerleader out there for us, trying to recruit specific types of business or specific whatever it is that we think is going to make this work. And I'm just going to stay on that topic because I think our staff can absorb, even if I'm not going through the list. Also on the with the same, in that same way, the co-working space. I'm not sure. I'm also, I think it would be wonderful if it could be at the library. I know that with City Hall, at one point we were looking at leasing out space and we couldn't do it to a for-profit business because of the laws governing that. And so I don't know if we are constrained with kind of those kind of hubs. I know they've done it in like Brentwood.
Just meant like carols and like look at the Lafayette Library. It's space planning and just letting people use the space a little bit differently, not for profit, not revenue generating. So I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. So I do think it's also something that where that retail person can also assess that need. So in addition to doing that, if that's something we can just do outside the budget, that seems like great. So definitely supportive of it. I think it's something where that retail broker person could also be looking at how and where there might be a market for that in our town. I think we all know there's a market for that. And I think it might be very interesting as part of our planning process for the BART site to be looking at that as well, because BART is hurting. The transit agencies are hurting. And while people are fleeing from San Francisco, they're fleeing from downtown office space. They're not leaving that office space because they don't want to work in offices and with their staff anymore. And there are people who live in Orinda who control those kinds of decisions and may be looking for places where they can work with their employees and bring their dogs and do things in a way that hasn't traditionally been easy to do in those traditional office hubs. And if it is some flexibility with it being live work, which at a time in the early 2000s was a concept that didn't have a lot of traction, it might have a lot more today when there's uncertainty about which one is the driver. So I think that that's something, so that just speaks to having that retail broker person out there to kind of help guide. I think that person could be very helpful in a variety of functions. And that's why I kind of take away from maybe some of these other things like me, where I'm not saying yes to definitely to everything, because I think that there are some things we really want to do that might not be in the funded decision packets right now. Okay, so, but I don't want to leave decision package 5 on the plan Orinda implementation resources. I agree, like definitely, I think the staff was intending to flush these out more based on what we're talking about. I know we have a part-time, or we had a temporary position in planning, and that position has been very helpful with doing some promotion at led the bike to work day efforts, and has developed kind of as part of that a passport program to go around and work with local businesses to sort of promote them as part of that. So I think that all of that could be interesting coming back with that retail broker and that staff position, kind of how those work together. And those are on different pages because one is an ongoing cost versus a one-time cost. And I do like that they're broken out by one time versus ongoing. That was helpful. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, we're all on the same page. Okay, so then, let's see. Talk about that. So, okay, so we didn't talk about the road stabilization fund, and I just want to share that this is, I think, something that is important for us to look at as we look at a few of these areas. You know, we had just mentioned a couple of these smaller sinkholes that we experienced, but we also have some pretty big areas. One is sounds like a lot of Camino Pablo, this problem growing up a place, you don't know the street names, Camino Sobrante, going all the way up to El Ribero, where we heard that even though we've done the huge slope repair, that there's possibly much of the rest of the way to still do. And there's another area, I think the city manager, you mentioned another area that I wasn't even.
Happy Valley.
Happy Valley. So on the evacuation routes going out that direction, there's a similar type of problem. And so that's why I advocate for that one. The long-term planning fund was very helpful in getting the money together for the general plan. And I'm not so sure that that's not something we kind of want to have out there to do things like our objective design criteria, which I think that's been funded, but it just to get thinking of those kind of planning things. I'm heard a lot of consensus already around the community master plan wait a second, is that for the park, the idea of the park that we have a community that is looking to fund. I mean, you can see how our community comes together. And when we have a group that's so passionate about something like our community park, which has always been privately supported through residents, I think it's really important to enable that. The pedestrian bike trailway preliminary design for Wilder, connecting Wilder with downtown, I think is extremely important for the facts that for all of the reasons that the city manager mentioned. Supporting downtown, connecting to downtown was always part of this idea about Wilder becoming part of the city of Orinda. I think we have to keep a focus on that because it is hard when you're separated like that to be part of the town. So I think that's a way, as well as helping to connect the Caltrans site. Which I know we call it the Caltrans site. It's like this very beautiful idyllic settings. Calling it the Caltrans site makes it sound like an old bus stop. I think it makes it become a little more real to people and how that's connected. The capital projects, the multi-year staffing to support expanded capital projects. And, this is one where we have a backlog of capital projects, the tiles on the library. Just so many things that the mini park, we have a lot of things that are, I don't know if the mini park falls into that, but we have a backlog of projects because of this funding and being able to get going, but that aren't getting done. And is that a staff position or is it more contract time? I reserve judgment, but I think it's important to get the projects done that we've sat here and worked on and move forward on. So I think we talked about 7 and 8 is kind of part of that. As share Councilmember Malkani's thoughts on those, that those get flushed out. Was that your comment, that those kind of get flushed out as part of those other positions as well? Okay, got it.
To the extent we fund maybe a lower amount.
Thank you. Right.
We just don't.
Right. No, that was very well said. And how I like that kind of the interconnectionness with that other one. And yes, what can we do there at not quite that amount? Because as you can hear, I certainly speaking in favor of a lot more than I think actually will pan out here in budget numbers to actually be possible, although I'm hoping it's all possible. The EV charging stations, I really am passionate about, but I do agree that this isn't something that the city should have to spend money on. Like, it should be cost neutral. There should be, entities out there that want to do it. I know that that's not, that the city managers work very hard to find these people, and we're hopeful, but I would love to have them, but I think it falls further down on the list to the extent that we're, depending on how much we have to invest in it, because it seems like we're providing the space, we're already investing in it by doing that. Okay, the legislative advocacy, I had not had that on my most important lists until being won over here. And I think it's one where I think understanding how it works, I think there would need to be more like how it works to make it effective, but what I'm hearing is the point is to get more state funding to continue the success that we're having in getting more state funding.
That would be my goal. And again, the scope of what you can hire professional government relations people to do is almost endless, and so you can create the scope that you want. You don't have to, you don't have to say one size fits all. What Townsend is doing for the city of Lafayette may not be what we would choose to want someone to do, but we could figure that out. So, but my goal of why I think it's important is I do think we have to, we have places where we should try as hard as possible to maximize more state funding. And the other thing that I think we should do more of, that I see it us being limited because of the size of our staff, is more coordination with other entities, because 5 entities together get more traction than the city of Orinda at 20,000 people. So that's where I'd like to make sure we, again, try to leverage and capitalize on putting things together. I mean, to me, if the city of Orinda and the town of Moraga and MOFD and East Bay Regional Parks and East Bay Mud and PG&E all want, a grant for fire prevention in a huge swath of acreage where there's whatever, that's more powerful to lobby for than just us by ourselves. So that's what I'm interested in. So I'm interested in more state money, because the irony is we're a community that pays a great deal of money to the state of California and seems to get the rock bottom of the schools, you name it. We're at the bottom of the list for the money we get back. And then, but that we're in the taxpayer bracket that's funding it. So.
Thank you very much for that. The formal ambassador system, I'm wondering, I definitely support the idea. I'm wondering if it really does require funding, or if this is something where this is kind of, I'm wondering, I would much prefer to spend the money on the implicit bias training and the equity-based analysis. And then maybe it comes from that we're able to find people because I'm not sure the ambassador system, it seems like we kind of do that as the mayor's liaison, like it's free, like we council members sort of do that for free. But I might not understand all that it's the city manager's coming up to the microphone.
I was just say, thank you, Madam Mayor, because, I really appreciated the time the council spent in strategic planning, and we captured this comment that was made. But, I'm not sure I quite captured, and I can't tell you which council member suggested it. I've talked to the mayor and Councilmember Malkani about it. None of us can recall. So if I've captured this wrong too, I'm just going to admit I did my best to try to do that. But I don't know if it was Vice Mayor G or Councilmember Iverson suggested, or maybe it was Councilmember Riley, who's not here this evening. So I may not have hit the mark on, I did my best sort of, quite honestly, just doing a little research about what this looks like in other places. So that's what you see in the narrative, but I may have missed the mark. I will admit, but I at least wanted to try to stimulate that discussion, right? So.
Well, you have, so this has been good. And it does, it's, getting people involved, it's really important. So I think you've gotten it in our minds, and we can work on how to do that. Let's see. Okay. So, the quarterly community meetings in other neighborhoods, I would love to have the meeting at Wilder and other areas. I don't want to pick it over other things. We were there this weekend, the William Penn Mott Jr. Awards were there, and it was lovely to be in Wilder and to experience this new beautiful city building. But I don't want to pick it over some of these others. I'm hoping, enhancing engagement with the Orinda Union School District. We have the 2x2, and I'm hoping we can just, we keep building off of that. I know it does take up a lot of staff time. We had several staff at our last, including the chief and our administrative services director, our city manager. So I am very thankful for that. I'm hoping we can do it without additional expenditure. And then finally, okay, so, and then finally, the private drainage facilities assistance. This one, I hope we can flesh this out a little more and think about it. I think this is really important, because I'm very, I listen to the Bairds and to the people in Sleepy Hollow Lane and Ichabod, and I want to do something. And then I'm looking at the budget reality, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't know. I don't want to ask staff, just, I guess we'll get to it in the capital improvement budget. I don't know if they're able to rattle off the price right off the top of their head. Probably not, but the number is astonishing. And the fact that there are other neighborhoods that are also experiencing this means that the city isn't in a position to be able to do this equally in every place this may be happening. And if there is one place and it's just one place and we're able to fix it and move on, that would be one thing. But my concern is that it isn't, and that this is a mix of a private issue that's coming off of this hillside. I don't know. I'm not the engineer here, but that would be my concern, and that if we aren't able to, that we address these types of issues equitably, and that this private drainage facilities assistance, however that might be, what, helping neighborhoods to come up with facilities districts or whatever it might be, would be a more equitable way of handling it for our whole community.
I do, just to chime in there. So, and maybe the shorthand title, but the idea is it's captured more in the narrative. And I think this was raised by Councilmember G at the strategic planning session, was the idea of the city helping neighborhoods, not necessarily paying for the improvements, but considering like a drainage improvement district or a community facilities district type of thing, where that can only be effectuated by working with the neighborhoods and then coming together. These are tools where then property owners agree to assess themselves. Because part of the problem is sometimes not a neighborhood might get 9 out of 10 people to agree to do something, but someone doesn't want to contribute. And if the neighbors go through a process, there's some overhead associated with that. But if a majority of the neighbors who are going to be paying the assessments, you could put a district in place that would, have everyone participating. So we offer that same tool, for example, it's available in the council's as a tool in the private roads policy. No one's taken us up on that yet. But if there was a neighborhood where informally they collect money and people aren't contributing and they wanted the city to facilitate, because cities can do that, formation of an assessment district, and that's for the property owners balloted yes during that process, that could solve that problem, right? And then the money would be collected on the tax bill and the neighborhood could expend it to maintain their street. So those tools are out there. The idea here was some level of, at least as I captured, some level of staffing that might allow us to more proactively suggest those. We have a list of, I don't know exactly how many, but there's a list of at least 50 trouble spots where there's drainage issues that are mostly private drainage problems, right? So, and that's the nature of very beautiful and bucolic Orinda, is it built out without a comprehensive storm drain system. And it's a unique mix of public and private, right? And, so that's a blessing and a curse, I think. So
Another easy example, and part of what made me think of it is right in my own neighborhood. We have a number of places in the community where private property owners are supposed to be maintaining the creek vegetation. Like there's a creek that's flowing behind their back property line, right? And they're supposed to keep the weeds and the debris and everything. Well, multiply that by all the people down a long street, and what do you get? You get some people that know they're supposed to do it. Most of them have no clue they're supposed to do it. Some of them are elderly and have no, but if the option was they could pay X amount of money into something where then that paid for it, and then somebody could come take care of it. I think we would solve a lot of problems, because I think a lot of people would be open to, yeah, I'll pay my $500 or $1,000 a year, and then I don't worry about the weeds in the creek. Somebody comes and gets rid of them all, right? I don't know. So good.
Thank you for that. That's what we get for having an engineer. We get a great benefit having an engineer on our city council. So thank you. And thank you to the council for indulging me in that very long description of the items. So so I'm wondering, yeah, please.
Talk a little bit about,
please, yes,
because I feel like
would
this
love
is
it.
so
I thought-
linear that we're not
I thought
talking,
that
or
this
also
is
the way they make us
wonderful.
sit like this, that we.
Please, Councilmember Iverson,
I
go
just
for
had,
it.
I just had two things in listening to some of the subsequent comments that I wanted to rebut or add to. One is, there was a lot of questioning about the 200,000 on the implementation of Plan Orinda. And what I heard so often was there were so many things that needed to get done, and they're just terminally understaffed in that department. I do think they need resources for anything that comes forward in terms of downtown projects. They're just barely keeping up with the homes that come through planning. There just isn't capacity to also be doing all these zoning changes. And think about that list that came with the housing element of all of the implementing ordinances. Those all get laid on planning's doorstep. So I actually believe that's contract staff, part-time staff. It's people resources, and I do believe they need them. So I'll defer to the group to come back on the 20th. But if that's the case, I wouldn't cut that one if they think they need it. And the other one is this, the 45,000, I sort of look at those as combined as the bias training and the equity-based analysis. And I would modify it slightly. And I know this is an area you are very passionate about, but when I think about, and I forget it was from the strategic planning resources that they gave us, or if it was from the stay interviews, but I thought I saw something that said the demographic makeup of our 36 staff people was actually kind of better than the average. They actually had asked the question, done the analysis, and it was a good answer. And they're getting implicit bias training already. So in the sense that we're the board of directors and we've got a really capable executive staff, I might give them that budget and let the people who do this for a living decide on the best quality of bias training, and say it doesn't have to be free, because I think right now they're using a free one, and say if you want to spend it on a better quality, whether it's live or a really good because the online ones are getting quite good, but to do the right thing. But what I heard in the stay interviews was professional development. I don't see anything in any of our allocations for career development, technical skill, the kind of professional development that anybody who wants to grow in their career gets. And so that's why I would maybe let the people who are the subject, who are the department heads, have that budget to use for a combination of professional development, training, whether it's bias training, skills training, and doing an analysis as to how they're doing on some of this stuff. So I would just give them more flexibility to spend it, if you agree.
If I could just point out, there is generally in each operating department budget some money for training and professional development. So is it enough?
Negative feedback that we
I
get.
would say the answer to that is always probably not. But I just don't, we do invest and we do other training. We get some training
I thought
through
that was one
our.
of like our top 3 negative feedback.
Yes. And, but part of that also gets to, I would just say, is that even if we have the funding, sometimes it's hard to free people up to go do it. So it's a matching of resources. So for example, as you pointed out, we've had some additional staffing to get us through the development of Plan Orinda. And unless we allocate funding, that staffing will be going away. And we will do our best to get to these things as time permits. But, most of our planning staff is paid for by fees. So there's actually very little time that can support these non-fee supported activities. It basically falls to our planning director, who works very hard. But we have had some additional resources during the Plan Orinda process. And what we heard from the council was, and this is by way of explanation and background. We have a list, for example, I'm going to compliment our city attorney. We have a list of 50 code changes we know we need to get to over time, and we nibble away from those. You did 3 of them, I think, recently as time permits. But exactly as pointed out, there are like 70 or 80 separate actions that we need to do in the safety element, Plan Orinda, and the housing element. We've got conceptual objective design standards, but unless we put those into an ordinance and codify them, they're just written into the plan. So they're not actually something we can use to guide our efforts. So we're very cognizant of the need to as your city manager, I've got a notoriety for being a bit frugal and fiscally conservative, and I stand by that. But also, I think we sometimes have to make strategic key investments if we want to accomplish these lofty goals that we have set. So, what I heard this evening, for example, from the council, and we'll circle back the 20th, that one example was, we haven't forgotten the idea that we want some consideration for aesthetics and public projects, right? But and so that doesn't appear here per se, but the idea of putting some money in a general fund capital projects fund, if we had to pay for the garden club raised money to do the stone veneer on the minor road bridge, because we couldn't use state or federal funding for that, that would be available to make that enhancement. So I see our public works director stepped out for a moment, but the idea being is that, as we bring forward projects in the future, we're going to always make sure we step back and said, is there an aesthetic component? Can we fund that from available resources? Or you may have to come back and say, if you really would like us to, guardrail, for example, the feds won't fund guardrail that's patinaed, right? It's no longer considered, the right kind of material from a safety perspective. Doesn't mean we can't go back later and paint it, but we're probably not, or do something else, but we're not going to be able to include it in the federally funded project. So, this is where there is some overlap for some of these ideas that give you some resources, and especially the one-time money, to the extent you put those, wherever the council lands and you're comfortable with, in the future, if there's a higher priority need, money's not irrevocably going there, but it's just sort of establishing a priority based on what we know now. And then, if there was a great grant funded project and we needed a 20% match and we were short 300,000, we could go back in and reallocate that. So it's just beginning to, at a high level, say these are the important areas in which we want to reserve some funding because we know we'll have need in the future. But the council's not going to be bound to those categorizations. You can always move money around later, but I think it does help to establish priorities by saying, this is where we're going to set aside money to meet these needs.
Thank you very much. And that was very comprehensive. And just a little side note, I wanted to share that area that I kind of raised during the workshop, during the retreat, that seemed like such a not a very attractive new improvement has turned into just a beautiful around the bend on the way up Camino Sobrante or down. It's just, and it's not a painted guardrail, but it has this beautiful wood posts and the black fencing behind it. And I think that I don't know if people have gotten a chance to see it, but it hasn't been, it's just, staff did a really good job. I don't know if there were changes or if that was always the plan, that ugly fence was always coming down and the pretty little black fence was always coming up. But I don't know that it's unconnected, it's maybe unconnected, but those things tend to get people out. You're just seeing so many more people walking, actually seeing people using that guardrail thing to actually walk in between that and the fence so that they're off the road, which is great. And we're seeing more people go up and down the street. So I think that those aesthetic things that you brought, thank you, are they have kind of a more global effect on people. And
that was, as we've talked about, just the plain chain link fence, that was probably an aesthetic oversight. That was not very expensive to correct that. But then also, I just want to compliment our public works staff. We did get an award from the American Public Works Association for the La Vivienda culvert project, which again, that could have just been a plain concrete wall, but the culvert, it actually is finished in sort of the faux stone. So we're not batting 1,000 there yet on those elements, but it's helpful for the council to remind us of that. And then as projects come forward, I'm asking the public works staff now, have we considered that? We've heard from the council and, we're trainable.
it was like, yeah, thank you. And just not to go on too much more, but just since we have the opportunity to all be here, it's interesting that how that guardrail looks not painted. It looks really nice. Like it doesn't need to be painted because it has these other elements around it. It just makes it look modern with the wood and everything.
So Scott, you just missed a number of compliments for Public Works. So, I just want you, so you should leave the room more often, I think, perhaps. So.
our Public Works, very modest. So thank you. Thank you for all you're doing to make Orinda safe and well able to be traveled and beautiful. So thank you. Okay, so more conversation.
Wanted us to be able to like talk amongst ourselves where we didn't have total vision lock, and those are my only observations.
Well, to that end, I have a
Couple more things to add, which is that I was persuaded by Vice Mayor G's explanation of the legislative advocacy, and I do think that's really important. And then I was also persuaded that the Plan Orinda implementation, planning, zoning, all this additional work in the planning department is a separate position from retail encouragement. And I'm thinking that retail encouragement and economic development, though, to the, and I guess there's overlap and it's obviously close working together. A couple thoughts. One thing about the, so I'm convinced that that's two separate positions, but with the legislative advocacy, one thing I've always wondered is, could we do something like this on a regional level? Or does it need to be Orinda has its own person in terms of resources? And I think your comments, Vice Mayor, answered that, which is that Orinda needs to have its own person. Am I correct? Do you believe that?
I think
Okay.
so. You can go out in the world and coordinate with everybody that will talk to you, but you have to have somebody that can do it for you. So.
And it's different. Do you mind if I jump in?
No, I was
Okay.
thinking as opposed to like La Orinda hiring someone is different from Orinda having their own. Okay.
If I'm understanding correctly, and I just wanted to seek clarity on what you were saying, is that this isn't really the traditional person that we see when we go to Sacramento and we're speaking on a bill and there's, Joe, the lobbyist stands up and says, I'm here on behalf of the city of, and then he has pulls out something from his paper and he lists 25 cities. And then he's like, I'm here to, say vote, whatever. He's more like this person is in an office and is looking at these bills and figuring out what is going to help the city from a funding perspective, and then going and maybe they do that too, but they have a bigger role in identifying these types of funds and then working with the city to go after those grants and that sort of thing. It's a more holistic kind of role. Okay. That's
And last comment on my part, the mayor did bring up something really important that, because I did say that I supported the community services officer, but she did remind me that, yes, indeed, we had some real challenges with that in the past. And maybe it was just simply we had the wrong person comes to mind as maybe, but I think that if we were to decide on that, because of the differences in whether you're a sworn officer or not, that would be important to work through. And with a little bit more conversation, and given that I'm probably just tired, I understand what you're all saying about Plan Orinda. So erase my earlier comment where I said I really don't get this. Now I get it. So.
That end, I think I understood a little more than me what the benefit of a community service officer, but just feel like, again, some of these ideas are high level and need more fleshing out. I just wanted to address Councilmember Iverson's comment, because I appreciate the question and the engagement. I do think that professional development is very, very important. And I remember exactly I agree with your comments in terms of what you're saying. And I think it sounds like, there just needs to be made more space available for folks to be able to do that, whether it's resources of time and money, but money on that tends to be smaller amounts relatively. And I do think that equity and focus on equity and training on equity is something that we all just have. It's different. And it's something that we all just have to constantly remind ourselves of, myself included, because of all these obvious reasons in terms of all the messaging we've gotten throughout our lives that isn't necessarily that.
But they're doing implicit bias training already. So I just want to make, I totally support it. It's just that it's already there.
So I don't know that the cost expense attached to this is necessarily what I would attach or is necessary. The request came from that it should just be done every year. And I do think that doing that sort of thing I have done the other type of training for clients in my professional life, the anti-harassment, anti-bias training. And I can tell you it is different to do that online than to do it in a room with a good trainer. Right. But I don't know that a good trainer, I don't know that could be scheduling someone for one day and may not be
Only
the
point out,
cost associated.
36 people is a very small organization. So when I think about our strategic priority of a DEI lens, I consider that our onus, that when we're looking at housing and schools and all the policies and all the decisions that we make, that we should be adding that lens. And it's a lens. And so I just want to make sure that we're not making these 36 people sort of the magnifying glass of all of that when they're already overworked and have no time and can't do the training they want. So that was all. But I really want to defer to the, HR and city manager and the people who are in charge of this is their day job. But I support a budget, and I really support that. Well done. It's eye-opening and it's great.
And I think I agree with you too, in terms of deferring on the details to our HR manager and professionals who are very aware of how to do this properly.
Ours have anything? Okay. Thank you for hanging in here with us. Okay, well, terrific. Well, I think staff's going to say that they received more input than they expected from us tonight.
No, it was we appreciate it. And, when we come back, we'll be chatting about it over the next week or two. And, but this is really, a discussion for the council to own. We can, as your staff, facilitate with information and certain perspectives. But, and you started this with the strategic planning, and the whole idea was we didn't want to adopt a 2-year budget without visiting these topics. And no, we haven't fleshed out every option. Sometimes we don't have a complete understanding, but so it was very helpful there. And, what comes to my mind is, sort of just circling back on someone saying, for example, the aesthetic question sort of gets addressed by having money in a general fund capital projects fund, right? And so we'll do our best to sort of tick and tie things together, but you're still, it becomes to the council. It's certain things is not you to convince me as the city manager or to convince the staff. It's you as 5 elected officials have to come to a consensus of, do you share, especially on the budget referrals, we agree we should be spending money and or staff time to flesh those out at a much higher level. The ones that we've recommended, we'll circle back and tell you how they all hang together, and the extent we can be helpful in the other areas, we will. And, we will debrief tomorrow in our department meeting and be working at it over the next 5 to 7 days. We have to produce the next agenda. And the nice thing is, some of these things really the council says, let's defer this and revisit it a little bit later in the year. I'll just give you one example. You could say we'd like to do a more detailed review of a dog park. Can we refer that to the Parks and Rec Commission in the first quarter of the next fiscal year to flesh out that idea a bit for us and look at some sites? That wouldn't be a lot of staff time or money. You don't necessarily now have to decide you're going to set aside, $100,000 to develop it, because we don't know where it would be. And then, but then later, if you decide you want to do it, you'd have a capital projects reserve you might be able to tap to actually implement it. So it is just trying to provide a framework that allows for future decisions to be made based on what are the council's priorities.
Clearly, a very careful framework was thought through in the development of this budget, a long process that started last year with developing the idea for this retreat, developing those ideas, and this incredibly thoughtful manner of presenting the budget and proposals that I know was extremely lengthy amount of staff work and thoughtful staff work. So thank you.
But still a new process, one that can be fine-tuned to reflect how the council would like to do it. And, so hopefully I'm glad it's being well received, but it really will reflect how this council and future councils might like to use these tools in the future. So it's something that's evolving. as we talk.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to H2, which is our proposed draft capital improvement plan.
Well, yes, we'll bring our Public Works Director up. I won't add other than we did review the CIP with you at a prior meeting. So Scott will update you. I don't really think there's been a lot of changes, but he's got a presentation for you. So we'll just get Scott going right away.
Before Scott starts, I believe, isn't our new rules, do we extend at 10 o'clock?
You know, our city attorney just stepped out. Is
Yeah,
it
so
10 or
let's-
10:30?
I think
It's 10.
it's 10. So is everybody, so we have two more items and then we have a closed session. So is everyone good voting to go to 11?
Scared of the fact that I know that Vice Mayor G is.
I was gonna say,
Hanging on.
well, I don't know how long. All three of them seem like they're going to take a long time altogether. Is there any of it?
I don't know. Scott, you're just updating us on where the capital.
What I was going to
improvement-
ask is how long is this
Yeah,
presentation and can it be done quickly?
Can we,
I can make it as quick as you
Yeah.
like.
short
It
update?
is a draft
two should be really
CIP, so I'm just gonna go over some high points and then, I have all the various fund balance pages available on a slideshow, so we can go directly to that if there's specific questions. Otherwise, we can make it as quick as you want. Then we will address the unfunded project list and some of the changes per your direction at the last meeting and discuss the Ichabod Lane in a little more detail.
I think that would be really helpful. And I think knowing this, or go ahead.
I was just going to add that there also were a lot of questions about sort of Measure R funding. So I don't, if we could address it briefly tonight, does that mean we could come back to it at another meeting?
Yes. This isn't the adoption of the capital improvement plan, but I think that, I think that Scott intends to be able to answer that. So I think that we could just have that presentation on any new parts and maybe just kind of a short presentation and then jump into the questions, because it's just that we have a very prepared council and and a lot of material to get through. And I don't think they're tremendously long. My expectation would be that we'd finish by 11. Or before. It's just then we don't have to watch the clock. We do. I have to watch the clock, but
I would support until 11, but let's try to,
Yes, please. Yes, I agree.
The SSTFC thing is.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we do still have an important topic in the closed session. Do we only have one topic in the closed session? One, okay. But I'm fine with,
Apologies to the Vice Mayor. I want to move that we extend time to 11.
I'm fine with.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries 4-0. It's unanimous of those council members present that will go till 11 PM. All right, with a hard stop. So Public Works Director.
Okay, good evening again, City Council. Thank you. And we'll get right into it. So the CIP, again, it's a 6-year period that's covered. So it includes I'm not sure why this slide's coming up double, but it should be one slide maybe we could fix that so it's a little easier to see. But in any case, as Mr. Alessio pointed out, we're including the year that we're finishing up, and then we're going forward 5 years with estimates. But even the year we're finishing up is an estimated amount because we don't final it till a few months after the close of the year. And then the forecasts, the first 2 years are incorporated in the biennial budget. And of course, the later years past that have more uncertainty because they're further out. Now, here's the proposed new projects. First, from the first meeting we had back in May, those are all the projects we discussed and they are included. And then beyond that, we found need to add 3 more projects, all winter storm related, that we did additional assessment on and realized we need to make these capital projects because they exceed 60,000 and so forth. Project categories. So the overall 6-year period, again, the 50 million it's just for comparison. That includes 6 years. It includes a lot of projects that are really getting completed this year. So that number is not one to sweat too much. Proposed 23-24, the first year of the biennial budget, there's 17 million. A lot of that is transportation drainage, which is typical, and that's what Public Works does. City Buildings Park under Parks and Recreation, that's about 3 million. The funding breakdown, again, this is a little tricky to look at because, I mean, it varies greatly year to year. For example, this coming year, which I'm referring to, 23-24, we have quite a few grant funded projects that are finishing up. So you go forward, it's not going to be the same. We're not, it looks like, wow, you're getting 40% grants. That's maybe a little deceptive. I don't know if we're quite that good going forward, but that's what we strive to do. Then I'm just pointing out the different sorts of fees that we look at. The restricted ones there, 45% in local taxes, and then state and regional taxes, 14%. And then we usually try to keep a small, the appropriations we try to limit, but there is, as you know, from the earlier discussion, the Fund 700 and Fund 704 that are getting some money recommended be appropriated to. The planning process, again, we use this Planet capital planning software. We coordinate with finance department to make sure our data is jiving with what's on their books, which are the official numbers. Then we work together to come up with revenue and then operating cost estimates. We perform the analysis using the software, looking at how much is a project really going to cost. Like these new projects, you have to figure out roughly what are the costs, what's the schedule. And then we look at what fund is appropriate to use, taking into account if it's a restricted fund or not. And then the program kind of cranks it all out. And some of the output is in the attachments to the staff report. And among those, I mean, we can look at them if you have specific questions. Again, this is attachment. I think this was A, which is the projects by category, which again breaks it down into the departments and types of facilities. And then we get into the funding source summary. Now it's a little weird title because it's really a summary of the expenditures that we're drawing from for the capital project. So those numbers, you have to kind of hunt for where that comes out of the line items in the software. Sources and uses of fund. So this is a key part of the output that we look at, because we try to basically achieve different goals. Like in this case, we had to spend out the money and close this out. So that's why there's a zero ending balance. That's what we wanted. 106 supplemental sales tax. That, as Mr. Alessio pointed out, we have a pretty healthy fund balance. And, again, we're looking to do it in tune with the priorities set forth by City Council with advice from the SSTOC. Gas tax, again, I won't go into every single one, but I'm just going to skip ahead to the, not to make you dizzy, but Fund 704. Let me go backwards here. Oh, it's on the same page. So at the bottom's Fund 704, and you can see that with the limited pot of money that we started with, we're kind of getting it spent out to where I'm just showing like 40,000 left in the third year, the second year of the biennial budget. So that's why the recommendation is that we supplement that so we get a minimum balance of, in the past it was 400,000. It's up to you what you want that to be going forward. Then these are the detailed project sheets. There's one for every project that we fill out, giving descriptions, justification, the cash flow basically that we have in the, expenditures for planning, preliminary engineering, design work, and construction management. And of course, construction is usually the biggest component of that. Again, I'm just trying to go through to the end to get to the so-called unfunded project list, which you could say is part of the capital project plan. It's just that there's no money allocated for it or even planned for it. And that's why it ends up in this unfunded list, which I think it might be the last item in your agenda. But then you can see here's the specific pages for the new projects that have a little detail on the location and the intent of the project. Bear with me and we'll get to the end. Okay, here we go. So here's the unfunded list. Now, we went through this briefly back in May, and there were some good questions about, well, why are we including this, or why aren't we promoting it to a capital project that's funded? So what I did here in track changes is just showing updates that we're proposing, and then in some cases we're showing that they should be removed. They've sat there for years, they've gained no traction, and we don't think there's a real reason to show them at this point in time. But again, we're open for input from you, I'm sorry. And if we go down to I'm sorry, I've got the wrong button going. Number 8 is Ichabod Lane. So the history on that briefly, that some of you know perhaps better than I, is that I believe was around 2020 at this same sort of meeting. We did get the residents who came in with, an unfortunate story and their circumstances, and council agreed, we'll make that a capital project. So mind you, at that point in time, it was not even an unfunded project. And the estimated amount was, I want to say, 50,000 or 100,000, something in that range. So I think it was brought up, and then in the final approved capital budget, we sort of fleshed it out at that number at 50. So we hadn't really looked at it in very much detail. We then did study that to some extent and realized that to do it properly and really make a difference in the drainage, we'd have to maybe spend more like what's shown there, like 400 and some thousand. So we reevaluated and realized that, in light of all the other priorities, we could not recommend that project going forward. And unfortunately, I have to state that at this time, we are recommending it be removed for the reasons shown. But again, council can decide to, bring that in a different manner or
So
keep
just
it on
Scott,
there.
so I think what Scott is also saying is that a prior iteration, it did get moved from a funded CIP onto the unfunded
Yes.
list. So when the residents say it's in the CIP, that's partially correct. It was at a much smaller dollar amount a few years ago, but then it got moved to the unfunded list and we have to say here, you heard that there are downstream issues that haven't been fully analyzed. So a key thing, if the city, does some work, we also have to look at what happens downstream, right? Simply solving a segment here, we can't increase the flow where it exits somewhere else, or we're going to create liability issues there. So water and storm drainage is very complicated here. So I think that's why the solutions are not always as simple as they seem, right? So
And for example, say this Ichabod Lane, I mean, I don't doubt that they had some, really horrific flows down there, but there's a lot of that going on every winter storm. This past year, we had almost 50 inches of rainfall in the rain season. And so it's I don't know what their experience was this year, but when they had the experience several years ago, I don't think I know we didn't have the same rainfall. So I'm just curious, if things have changed, but we do have a lot of other, I would say from my experience and our crew's experience and feedback, we have numerous other hotspots that are public drainage systems that are every winter it happens, we clean up, and there's not really a great solution. Our higher priority are things like the category A and category B pipes that was an approved plan. So that's where we recommend the money be spent as scheduled. These other things, we look at them case by case, and I'm sorry, that one does not really meet the mark in our opinion. So there's other projects on there too. For example, item 16, which is on your packet, page 277. That's where we talk about this Wilder downtown class 1 path. And, that's again, a very rough estimate, 3 million plus, but what Mr. Biggs was pointing out is that one of the recommended items would be, or to consider, a preliminary engineering or planning study for, say, 100,000 to get things going. So I will not go into details on that, but I could conclude at that point and then be happy to, answer questions or go into more detail as needed.
My first question, Scott, and I can't remember, and I think our city manager alluded to it last time. Is part of the problem on Ichabod, is it the upstream? Is there private drainage up there? Because by the time it's dumping onto Ichabod down to Sleepy Hollow, that is public, right?
Right.
Oh, yes. So, that's right, Vice Mayor G, and this is what occurs is the water's originating from up above in private parcels. So, arguably there's one, as I understand it, there's one commonly owned parcel there, including the one resident that was referred to as Garrett. They own a common parcel where the water sort of flows down to and then leaves their property and enters there is curb and gutter in that area, and it gets conveyed down to the storm drain inlet, and there's a cross inlet across the bottom. So, arguably it could be that, they should be retaining some of the water on their own property and building the retention basin. Now, of course, when that suggestion is made, people don't like that idea, right? So the city only touches the water for that short length from when it comes out of that private parcel and gets conveyed down to the storm drains at the end of Ichabod. And, sometimes the flows do exceed the capacity there because they're working their way down to a creek, I think, sort of between, I'm going to say maybe Sleepy Hollow and I forget the other, and it's not Lombardi there, but, or maybe it is just the loop of Sleepy Hollow, right? Sleepy Hollow loops there, right? So I think behind those homes, there's sort of a channel that flows between the two sections of Sleepy Hollow. So that water is working its way down to Lodenwasser Creek, basically. And that's all private drainage once you get onto the other side of the street.
So I have sort of two related questions to that. One I brought up at the last meeting, which may have been one of the craziest ideas I've ever had, because I'm not an expert at it, but the funding for or grants that may fall into the generalized category of safe routes to school. I mean, I tend to think of that as pedestrian facilities and bicycle facilities, but it is awfully true that there's an awful lot of water on what is obviously in our community a direct pedestrian path to Sleepy Hollow Elementary School. I would just be curious if you would ask the grants people if there is any crazy possibility of being able to do that. And the other sort of corollary question to that is, I don't ever recall in the time that I've been on the council there being any complaints from the parents at Sleepy Hollow School about the situation. So I'm kind of curious about that, because there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of kids that go there and a lot of parents, and that is a very congested little area. I mean, when I look at the pictures of the drainage, and I don't disagree with you, Scott, I can think of other places in Orinda that are getting that much runoff in really bad ways. But when I look at those pictures and then I think about what it looks like there, I'm surprised that, and I don't know if the school district was getting complaints, they'd be complaining to us, right? I'm just puzzled as to why there isn't more of an interest in the, school community around there.
Well, that is, certainly we can reach out and see if there has been, but I think also, as you heard, with the multipurpose room being under construction there for a couple years, my impression is there's more people opting they can't get on campus to drop off. So I don't know if when that opens again, will there not be as many people parking there? Certainly, I think you're right. The idea of safe route to schools, I've never heard of anyone talking about drainage improvements that would fall in this, but I think it's worth asking about. It's sort of thinking outside the box. I don't know if that's because, maybe that is right. So, I mean, we do keep an eye out for grants, but we'll talk with California Consulting about that.
It's probably not the craziest idea I ever had. But
One of there was, just to the city manager's point. So, in the 2x2 committee, they'd asked if we, would be available or able to budget for crossing guards because they're having a lot of issues around the schools and wanting crossing guards. So I paid a little attention to this and because I was very excited that there are all these children walking to school apparently. But what's actually happening is that their parents are just really stressed out and they're not, or whatever, they don't want to do the line. And so they're just dropping their kids off, like apparently on Ichabod Lane and telling them to hike into school. So, I think that that's kind of what we heard today is that parents are going to Ichabod Lane and dropping their kids off. So I don't know.
To that end, it sounded like from the report we got that it was it wasn't just that you had the water, it was the water and the cars parked and the traffic and so I think it is, I'm not saying that, $400,000 is a lot of money, but that we just don't really have. But I really like the idea of trying to think creatively to find some funding there and a solutions. And one thing I was going to ask is again, my kids were Delray, so I'm not a sleepy mom, so I don't remember. Are there sidewalks there? I'm assuming no. On that
There's
road.
like I feel like there's areas. Do you know?
Because safe routes to school might need
I-
to create sidewalks
I was gonna
and
say-
fix drainage while it's being done.
I feel like do we know if there are any? There might be some in some little spots.
If you get down closer to where the turnaround
Mhm,
is,
mhm.
there might be a little piece of a sidewalk there. I can't, again, my kids didn't go there, so.
But it doesn't sound that.
There are no sidewalks on Ichabod, because they talked about how above the curb, some of the soil and gravel is
Right.
washed away. So
So is just to, again, maybe it is a creative idea, but maybe it's doable, but
Well, in all honesty, my honest opinion is, and I don't know what Scott's is, but even without the drainage issue, the traffic flow through there when you have the time of day when everybody wants to drop off and pick up kids, even if you assume the multi-purpose room is done and the construction equipment is out of there, because that's a big mess too. But it's a terrible layout. I mean, Sleepy Hollow Road right there where it intersects Ichabod is really skinny. You're not even supposed to park on the one side of the street. And it's a terrible area in terms of the traffic flow for the school access. So I don't know, put it all together and find a giant grant to fix it all.
easier said than done. We
Yeah.
recognize that, but
Well, if I may, on the Sleepy Hollow side, there's paths in front of some properties, pathways in that they're not improved with pavers or concrete, that the kids use from what we have seen and heard. But unfortunately, in some cases, the property owners have put rocks in either as part of their landscape plan or to prevent perhaps people from pulling up off the curb to park I'm not really sure what the motivation is. So there, of course, if we were to propose sidewalk installation, there'd be the normal amount of private property owner resistance, even though it's very likely within city right of way to do that sort of thing.
also at that point, it's sort of up to the residents to decide as a community if they're willing to support sidewalks, if the sidewalks would also address drainage problems. But we're all speculating about some great grant out there that may or may not exist. So there's that. Maybe we should turn back to the CIP, which this is part of, but
Right. So
Well, for
actually-
example, just based on the discussion here, you might see that Scott was suggesting we remove the project. That at least would be one decision, would be to leave it, but rework the language to say explore non-traditional approaches, including safe school routes or something. I mean, we can do a little bit of legwork and maybe we'll find something. I mean, we've chatted before with There tend not to be grants available for storm drain type of work, but the idea of linking it to something else that brings in it. Because as I understood, there was a discussion before I joined the city about widening Washington Lane that leads to Sleepy Hollow to effectuate better evacuation and access, and that would have widened the road. And that was, the council did not go down that path because there was a lot of neighborhood opposition. So is that a correct statement?
That's, I believe, right. Yes, item number 10 is just that item. And a study was done and sort of fleshed it out. You know, the cost here is shown as about 800,000, but it's really not gained traction. And
It would
that's why it
remove,
sits
would
on.
remove
Can I
people's
turn-
yard improvements.
Yeah, let
right?
me turn to Councilmember G because she was here and because my recollection, I don't have a recollection of that coming to us as like a decision of whether to go down that. I thought that it left us for other Councilmember G, do you remember us actually saying we didn't want to pursue that? I thought that was more complicated than that.
I thought it was more complicated too, because I thought it had a lot to do with MOFD.
Well, it did, and they were an advocate for widening the street, but you know, again, I wasn't here at the time. I don't know. Melissa doesn't
Not that
recall.
that it had a lot to do with them that we didn't. I think it would be. Is that what you're saying, Councilmember G, that we didn't go down that path because MOFD didn't want to?
No,
No, they
MFD
wanted
Oh, they
to.
wanted to.
They wanted to.
And we didn't. Okay.
I
I'm not-
do recall that the neighborhood didn't want to.
Okay. Okay.
But
so
I don't
we did.
remember
Maybe I
that,
was
you
not.
know.
So,
Okay. I apologize.
Right, and I think that was just it, that with that MOFD, they supported it, but then they have certain requirements, and that's where we got into needing to get into people's front yards, so to speak, even though again, it's public right of way to make those changes, and you know, there'd be resistance, and then, you know, we'd probably have to offer to pay for part of the removal and revegetation of the transition. So I think I was not personally involved in that, but I know SEBA was, and there were some definite challenges to it. So in any case, again, we can go down the list, or if you have specific projects that you're interested in or would wish to discuss further, or I could just focus on the ones that I'm suggesting we remove, going back to the item 1, the operational improvements. I just, again, that's been on the list for quite some time and I don't see it gaining traction. Item 2, Camino Sobrante slope stabilization. Now, this was brought up earlier, I believe, by the council here tonight. And our observations are that, I mean, although there has been problems, we've not really seen significant, I will say, movement, since we repaved it and did some, substantial reconstruction. That's not to say that there's not going to be movement in the future, but at this point, again, I'm not so sure that we need to keep it on that list. And that's why I'm showing it as being removed. And the next remove one is item 6.
Question, should we do it as we go or
Oh,
should we do it at
sure.
the end?
I think, or yeah.
Well, it was just
next-
on
Yeah, go ahead.
number 1, I have so many people want to talk about that intersection and how awful it is and how much they hate it. And so while I understand that it's Caltrans's responsibility and it's hard for us to control, I'm not sure I want it to disappear because the problem's not going to go away. So I would just question as to tactically what's a way to.
On this list, on our unfunded list.
No, it's
right?
on the remove list.
Well, I'm
Oh,
just
one.
suggesting we remove it. You could tell
Oh.
me no.
Could we keep it on the unfunded with the understanding that
I think that's a good idea.
we just don't want
Yes.
to, and
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
So,
thank
Scott,
you for
what
that.
I would suggest is, given where we're at and the other items, that perhaps we just let the council, rather than you going through, they perhaps see if they have questions or whatnot. And this is not your only bite of the apple, because this will be back as well on the 20th.
So do you want to do you want to do the process we did last time and just first we could ask questions, open public comment, and then just run through the list, the ones we have comments on? And I think we could do it a lot faster than, I certainly won't take as long as I did on the other list. Okay, so let's, so does anyone have any more questions for our Public Works Director.
I don't have a question about this list. I have one general big picture question, which is that we got a lot of public comment about the, CIP proposed budget based on concerns about Measure R funding not being there. And I do think that there's a lot of folks that sort of view the Measure R funding as sort of half. I mean, there's some that don't, anyway, there are a lot of folks that view it as half going for wildfire prevention and half going for other infrastructure needs, including roads and drains. And I know it's all general funds and there's no, allocation there. I think there is a perception of that. Based on the prior 0.5-cent sales tax and this being a 1-cent sales tax. So, and I'm not commenting at all anyway on that, because it's all general funds, but I did take to heart comments from, the former chair of the SSTOC, Judd Hammond, and others who are very well knowledgeable about our capital improvement projects and our roads and drains, as well as SSTOC needs. So I just wanted to, I don't know if you've had a chance to view his public comment, but it was, could we delay some of these projects for a bit? If, and I know we got the whole presentation from you previously about how doing these projects in a certain time frame does mean that they cost us a certain amount and delay might be more costly. I just wanted staff comment on that concept.
As Scott introduced, and unfortunately, Judd, who's been a great servant to the city and was on the predecessor CIOC, what he was looking at was outdated fund balance information for Measure R. So where he was concerned it had dropped in 1 year to be a very low amount, it's actually almost $3 million of fund balance. So it's not, he was responding to incorrect information. So, and that was what we sent out to the council this afternoon, was to just say, what happened in the coordination between Public Works and Finance is that their Planet spreadsheet just accidentally didn't get updated with that information. So if you look at where Judd had highlighted, it showed only 29,000 available or whatever it was in that 1 year. He was concerned with, it's actually almost $3 million that's available. So I don't think that is, what was that? Did you say something?
I was just saying, correct. That's
Correct.
yeah, there's a
Right. So
number
I think
there.
that was, there is lots of flexibility there. And the only thing I will also say is when the council, not this council, but the prior council, when Measure R was approved, they did adopt a 5-year CIP that indicated a level of funding for fire prevention and then program money in the next couple of years to storm drains, saying we'd spend about $10 million of Measure R in storm drains. And if we spend about $1 million a year in wildfire prevention, guess what, over the life of, and we're going to need pretty soon $2 to $3 million a year Measure R money to keep our streets up to snuff, that, it does end up being, sort of that equitable, because storm drains weren't part of the prior measure. It was just roads, right? So, but that is the meaty policy question that this council.
It was roads and drains.
Was it roads and drains
It
before?
was.
But not, it was drains as it related to the road work where you're doing, not the separate big storm drain system, was my understanding. Maybe I got it wrong, but we did do some storm drain work, but it was related to paving work rather than.
Well, it just became overwhelming.
Oh.
It was a big number. And so it.
But that is, for example, my understanding is we're looking at $40 to $50 million of storm drain work with about $10 million available for Measure R. So, that's certainly as you'll see in my budget message, it appears to me and our staff that about $1 million a year for fire prevention, unless there's something new that comes up, where there is a new program or a new opportunity seems to be what we would recommend as sort of the stabilized level of funding for wildfire prevention. And then if there is a new initiative that comes up or a new program that's been proven to work, the council can always revisit that. But then it would have to come out of roads or storm drain funding because there is a finite pool. We'll get a bit more money for Measure R over the life because it was only projected to generate about $3 million a year, and we're already at 3.8 or 3.9. So,
And I have two concerns about that. One is that I do think we might, I don't know if revenue will drop given where our economy is going. So I think we have to just keep that in mind. And number two, I lost my train of thought, but I don't think we have to. Oh, you were saying there's another initiative. There is another initiative that I think is coming to us. I think we saw that at the 2x2 and you know, there will be, I think we will be hearing about, you know, potentially and it's referred to as, you know, in the public comment as, you know, a group of individuals is working to establish a nonprofit organization along the lines of Diablo Fire Safe Council that would be able to make effective grants to groups of property owners. And this is, you know, again, something all in development, but it's something to keep in mind that is out there. I'm not advocating right now that I mean, we're not making decisions on adopting this tonight. I just want everyone to be aware that is a concern out there in the community. So, but at the same time, I'm not, you know, we have all this other work to do. So I just want to throw that comment out.
Right, thank you. And again, just to recap on that Fund 106, the sales tax, add-on sales tax, supplemental sales tax. On the screen here is that revised page. And the fund balance, the ending fund balance ranges from 2.6 to up to 7 million. So, you know, it's a pretty healthy balance. The only new projects we've added in this CIP sequence here are these Group B, these Category B projects. So, you know, 350,000 per year roughly. So we're not, you know, we're taken very little in terms of the funding recommendations at this point in time. So I think that would answer Commissioner Hammond's question.
I appreciate that correction. I see it in the supplemental packet.
So Scott, I was confused. So I didn't think that we were removing all of these projects off the unfunded list. Can you run through the numbers of the ones that you were wanting to
Sure.
remove?
Yeah, I haven't really highlighted them too well. So the ones that I had proposed be removed are number 1, but now I'm planning to leave it in. Number 2, I'm proposing be removed. And then we go down to number 6 to remove, number 8, which is Ichabod, to remove.
I think we as a council
stays.
decided that we want
And
to
we will
stay.
not, right, okay,
we're just gonna
that's correct. Yes, we'll
reword
leave
it.
that in there, absolutely.
And then what you said 6, which is the
And then number 14, which is aesthetic enhancement of the pedestrian overcrossing to sandblast and paint that.
okay, right.
I totally agree with
Yeah,
that.
we don't-
It's not even our
It's
facility.
it's not.
Why did you not have the Washington Lane as a remove?
I think because it may gain traction in the future. It makes sense in a perfect world, perhaps, to have that widened road, but you know, it's going to be complicated. And number 15, Orinda Oak Springs fire evacuation route for the reasons shown there, fire evacuation and trail access to Wilder. That one we're proposing to remove. And then the other ones we're not removing, we're promoting to a CIP project would be former number 18, which is the community park tennis court lighting, because that's already been promoted, and Wilder Fields lighting retrofit, since that's already a funded project. And that, I believe, that would be it in terms of.
Got it. So there's
yeah.
none that weren't just listed. Okay, got it. So I'm gonna, do you want me to jump in and start with this, okay, great, just because we're just late, we're just really short on time. And so, so here's what I would, just my quick, and I'm just going first because I had the benefit of everyone else going first last time and figure I can jump in here. Okay, so one, we've said we should leave that in. Number two, taking out Camino Sobrante slope stabilization. Again, we don't have, we're not saying we have funding for this, but I think it's something we need to keep on the radar and something we want to be looking for funding for, and how we handle these things. The state insurance commissioner came to Orinda last week, and we met with him, and one of the things he talked about was that he'd met with the governor of Hawaii, and they were kind of basically creating an insurance program for themselves to insure their reefs, because they're losing their reefs, their coral reefs, which then create a huge amount of storm damage. And so I'm guessing that this is some type of self-insurance. And that basically he's encouraging communities to, and he didn't say self-insure, right? He didn't use that word, but kind of a municipal pooling authority to handle these types of disasters, with the expectation that being basically the state saying, hey, cities are going to need to figure out how to find the money when their slopes and their roads collapse. And I think what Councilmember G or Vice Mayor G was saying was that we need to be going after funds, whether they're federal, they're state funds, to try to make sure we can get whatever we can. And so in that spirit, I would suggest we leave this on, because that is a huge slope, and it's one of our arterials. Is that right? Is it called an arterial? I believe it is. But it's a big evacuation route.
Yeah, at certain points, I think at a certain point, it just becomes a local road, but through that main section.
But through
I'm
the
pretty sure
section with the slope problem, it's going to be okay. Right. So I would say that that's really one that we want to leave there. We talked about Ichabod, so I don't have a strong feeling about the other ones that we're removing. That seems fine. Another one, I just because one of our Parks commissioners, an MOFD member, just wanted to remind us, I don't think he knew it was actually in here. So I told him, and he was encouraged, although we didn't have funding for it, was the landscape berm on Bryant Way. That's just something that hopefully we can keep on there. And as our downtown develops, we'll be able to make those kind of visual enhancements at some point in the future. But it's nice to have this list, so that, especially with the investment of somebody who's looking out for us at the state level and seeing if we can identify more funds. So thank you. Others, thoughts?
I agree with what you said.
Okay, great. Okay, terrific.
Substantively.
I made my comments as we went. I'm good.
Okay, great.
I would just say the last list you had of the ones you were removing, I would agree with those to remove them.
Staff have the direction it needs.
Yes, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your work on this and all the information.
I asked whether it makes sense to try to continue the SSTOC one.
Is this going to be a long discussion? I mean, basically, we're just getting their list. If we only because it may have some. I don't know that it has an impact. Maybe I should ask, does staff see this being relevant to our budgetary decisions?
Yes, but so if you I can do a very brief staff report because the list in front of you was developed by the SSTOC. They had a subcommittee when they gave you their annual report, I think in March or April. You asked them to present some updated goals. They had an initial review and recommendations when they were first meeting. This list was developed collaboratively between the commission and staff. The idea was just for you to see the updated goals and it's going to be going back to them again at their next meeting. But the bottom line is, from a staff perspective, we believe within the existing Measure R budget that we can accomplish what they're have itemized here within our existing resources, both staffing and consultant services and what we have budgeted for graphics and materials. So, but I think the idea was the council asked for it to at least be presented to you prior to budget deliberations in case there were any other needs that were identified. But so this was approved by the SSTOC at their last meeting. And there was a discussion of sort of perhaps to attach some dollar to that. So that is still going on with the staff working with the subcommittee, which is Commissioner Light, now Chair Light, and Commissioner Weinstein. But again, the initial document I saw today that they're still discussing, again, we believe can be accommodated within the existing budget. So I don't think it's going to result in direct budget approvals other than sort of the higher level discussion that Councilmember Malkani identified about, well, how much in the longer term of Measure R should go to wildfire prevention in those areas. So, but that's not really a decision you have to make now.
I want to really, yeah.
Sorry.
no, go
I
ahead.
want to recognize that it's a general fund and I'm not suggesting that there be a strict designation. I was just commenting on
No, right. but-
perception that some folks have.
Right, yes.
Just to clarify the reason, and I guess we could do it later anyway. I don't have any disagreement with what's here, but I do have some questions about things that I would think maybe we would want to discuss. Should we add some things here?
Oh, certainly that's a possibility, but that type of discussion, unless it, think would have a budget impact, or as we point out here, Measure R has a fund balance. So if there's something that needs to be done, you're not allocating 100% of available Measure R revenues, either operating and or fund balance right now. So if there are things that you would like the commission to explore, you could continue this item to your next meeting or even take it up again in July, for example.
Love to do that because I feel like we're just toast tonight and there's so many letters and interesting topics, and we don't get to give feedback to the SSTOC very often. So if we could continue it to a forum, that would be great.
Thank you. I think that that's a wonderful idea. And if we could do it at that July meeting, I would love to be there. Because there is the fund balance, I think it would, to the city manager's point, that there's a fund balance. With that, I think we can take it out of the budget discussion and just to hone in on some of these, and
Or feedback on the goals.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Do we have members of the public who have stuck around all night with
To
us
talk about
to comment?
the capital improvement. Yeah, because I don't think I opened up
Oh,
for capital
I'm sorry, I
improvement.
thought we had wrapped up capital improvement.
No, I
Right,
know, but
Madam
I
Mayor.
don't think that I asked for public comment during capital.
I don't know
improvement.
if there's people here for SSC.
And we can't see them.
We have three people, one
Oh.
staff member, two staff members, and then
But Judd Hammond is here.
So
So
you could
why
ask
don't
Judd
we-
whether he has any comments.
Right,
on-
because I haven't actually opened, I don't think we even called the SSCOC item. It just
Oh,
flowed.
I'm
out
sorry,
of
I
the-
thought you moved.
No,
on.
no, it's fine. It's fine. Because it was coming out of the capital improvement. We were talking about the capital improvement. So let's open public comment. If there's anyone who wants to speak on the capital improvement budget. Okay, we're going to continue. Judd, we're going to continue.
Oh, hands
Oh,
raised.
okay. Sorry. Well,
Judd, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't have a lot to add. I had been concerned in the initial CIP version of the Measure R page that it did show that low fund balance, which Scott had mentioned, and Doug and Scott got back together and straightened that out, and I can see that there's a good fund balance left, so that makes me feel a lot more comfortable. The only thing that I might mention is that it might be good to see one of those decision package lists or items on the decision package list for additional support of individual property owners or groups of property owners to have a fund to access to support their efforts in reducing the amount of fuels on their property and to reduce or to improve the hardening of their homes. There's nothing specific on the list, and that I find a little bit odd.
Okay, thank you. Is that, thank you, Judd.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the council. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Maybe it's gotten lost in that, but we do have $400,000 that was appropriated for the fire fuel reduction incentives, and what's not spent in the current year, which will probably only be about $10,000, is being carried over. So it's probably not apparent, but that is in there. There still is 300 and some odd $1,000, and then that's again where in the staff report we said, and if there is demand, we can replenish that in the future. But at this point, I don't think we'll even exhaust that in the next fiscal year.
And in terms of the additional packages or the optional packages, the way the budget's set up, the additional residual Measure R funds would not be included. Is that? I mean, are we talking about two separate
Right. We
funds?
didn't do
'Cause that's
decision packages
for
Measure
anything
R. It's
for
only
anything in
general
Measure R.
fund. Right,
Okay, so the
yes.
only Measure R funds are all listed in Fund 106.
Yes,
Got it.
right, exactly.
I actually like the idea of continuing this so that we can have some higher level discussions and letting the SSTOC take goal level feedback to come up with their own allocation this feels like a longer, more involved process than just doing a budget allocation, if you guys agree.
I don't know. One thing I just make some observations is that in addition to the 300, let's say we end the year at $390,000, there's going to be $390,000 there for people to have private grants to remove vegetation from their homes. In addition, we have a chipper program, and I knew we had the chipper program. I used chippers. I get it, right? And the value of that, the private subsidy there really didn't hit me until I recently saw one of the piles out. And the question is, so we're making these things already available. And I don't know, what is our chipper? Do we know offhand how much we spent on the chipper? Which it's not really it's not the chipper, it's the staff. It's basically the gardening staff that we're providing for free to our residents. And so if we take those two numbers, that's a huge amount for a community of our size to be allocating for private vegetation removal at people's homes. It's huge. And until that's maximally used, I don't know that we need to be making further, but within that, I'm not saying we should take that back. It's wonderful that we have that. And I've gone to MFT and I lobbied them and kept them from stopping their chipper program, which they tried to do as soon as we got our chipper program, because I think they realized that at that time, it was just, at that time, it was before it was right after Measure R passed. And our board member Jorgens definitely led the group to say, yeah, no, we're not gonna remove that. But it's a huge amount of money, those two allocations. So I just provide that observation here. I think it's great that, yeah, we do maybe the budget package process with relation to Fund 106. If that's your suggestion, that sounds wonderful. But I don't know that we need to go additional.
I want to muck up the budget process
got it.
with what is a longer, more strategic multi-year talk about allocation and purpose and goals.
In regards to what Councilmember Iverson is saying, one of my suggestions would be, I think it's appropriate at some point for us to have a joint meeting with the council and the SSTOC.
I agree.
I mean, we do it with the planning commission, and my brain is too foggy now to remember, but I'm almost sure we did it with the CIOC. Did we? Maybe not, maybe, but we certainly have done it with the planning commission more than.
Did we not? I feel like the council maybe did that once. I think there was a joint meeting. I don't know. We are running into our time limitation again. I want to make sure that if we're talking about the SSTOC, you may want to.
Yeah, we're still on the capital improvement program. So I
Unless
just wanted
we-
to make sure. So
Just to move us on our agenda.
Yes, yes. So was that, so Councilmember Iverson, I just wanted to understand what you wanted, what were you looking for? What your ask was with that? So I
There's
was
no
wondering
ask.
that.
I
Okay,
was just
okay.
commenting.
Okay, got it. Okay, great. So with that, does everyone feel comfortable continuing the SSTOC item to the July meeting? Is it, or no? So the city manager.
No, so just make sure we complete the capital improvement item. I just wanted to make sure the city clerk, we did receive an email, or I
Oh.
did, but it was related to Ichabod Lane, came in this evening right at 6 o'clock. I don't know if you mentioned that you asked about public comment for the capital item. So I just want to make sure that we mention that before we move away from the capital item. So we sort of blended these two items already, but because they are related. So do you recall the gentleman, was it Gary Phillips's name?
Received 3 written comments on the CIP from Steve Cohen, Kathy Finch, and Judge Hammond. And then later than that, we received an email from Paul Sullivan.
Okay.
And that was on the Ichabod Lane drainage issue.
Yes, so I think then CIP, and in regard to the SSTOC item, certainly I think the council has the report in front of them. You've had an opportunity. We did have the chair and a commission member here, but they departed earlier this evening. So, the action here was to receive the report and review the updated wildfire goals, discuss and provide direction. So certainly you can continue that to a future meeting. You have the information in front of you to the extent that there's elements of it that might influence your budget discussion. And of course, that can come up in the next meeting as well. And the commission is going to be meeting next week to review the draft budget, and they will probably have specific comments for you. We report back on the 20th.
Great, terrific. Okay, great. So that then brings us to, is it council member comments, or I don't know where we are, do we? do the
You
closed
are
session
your
first?
council member reports, Madam Mayor, unless,
Okay.
so.
Council member reports. Does anyone?
But I would suggest, I don't know, should we have a motion to continue the SSTO item to July 11th?
Oh, thank you. This is why we try not to go till 11 o'clock at night. Do we have a motion to continue the SSTOC item to July 11th?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great.
Well, it
Terrific.
is 11 o'clock here. It is 8 a.m. in Portugal.
That's true. I had my dual watch on the whole time.
Okay, so anyone have council member reports that can't wait until the next meeting? Okay, any city manager report that can't wait till the next meeting?
Just very briefly, it's summer, school's out, movie nights in the park, concerts in the park, food trucks Thursday, farmers market Saturday, lots of great public parks and rec activities throughout town. 4th of July coming up, but no, just generally get out and enjoy offerings here in Orinda.
Any items initiated? Okay, then we will move to closed session, which is item L. We have item A is conference with legal counsel with regard to existing litigation. As listed on the agenda, litigation is Orindans for Safe Emergency Evacuation versus City of Orinda. And so with this, we will seek any public comment that anybody has on this item. We have no public comment on this item, so we will adjourn into closed session and return